Chapter 21:14. Just as Xiao Chen and the others had guessed, Lunar Sky had no intention of killing the four of them. After all, killing the four of them would not benefit Lunar Sky at all. In fact, it might even ruin Lunar Sky's plans. Just as Xiao Chen and the others had guessed, Lunar Sky had no intention of killing the four of them. After all, killing the four of them would not benefit Lunar Sky at all. In fact, it might even ruin Lunar Sky's plans. Considering the background of Xiao Chen and the other three, if he killed them, it would be tantamount to offending Li Xiao, Dao Xiong, Luo Xing, and Jun Wuya, the four emperors, as well as the forces they belonged to. Moreover, Yin Li Tian and the four of them would not rest until one of them was dead. Therefore, killing Xiao Chen and the other three would only enrage Li Xiao and the other three. It would not benefit Yin Li Tian at all. Now that Yin Li Tian had successfully refined the mountain and river diagram, he was thinking about how to establish himself in the Great Thousand World. In this way, he could not afford to offend Li Xiao and the other three. Xiao Chen and the other three had fallen into Yin Li Tian's hands. Now, he only needed to wait for Li Xiao and the others to arrive. Although the space-time passage between the Wood World and the Great Thousand World was not stable and could not allow emperors to pass through, Yin Li Tian knew that Li Xiao and the others would definitely have a way. Just as Yin Li Tian thought, Li Xiao and the other three were indeed trying to find a way to break open the space-time passage between the Wood World and the Great Thousand World. Time passed day after day. Half a month later, Li Xiao, Dao Xiong, Jun Wuya, and Luo Xing finally opened the space-time passage between the Great Thousand World and the Wood World. At this time, at the entrance of the space-time passage, the four of them stood in the air, surrounded by experts from the four forces. The area within 100 miles had long been taken over by the four forces. It was not just the Heavenly Policy Mansion. At this time, many experts from the Moon Palace, Saber Sect, and Sword Sect had arrived. The Sword Sect was led by Vice Sect leader Lin Qing, 2 Dao Realm Sword heads, and more than 10 elders. Seeing that the space-time tunnel had been opened, Lin Qing stood behind Jun Wuya and bowed respectfully, "Old ancestor, I am willing to go to the Wood World to rescue the sect head." "There's no need for that. It's useless for you all to go to the Wood World. Just guard this place well and don't let anyone come close," Jun Wuya replied indifferently when he heard Lin Qing. Now that the Wood World had the Yin calendar sky, there wasn't much meaning in sending an End Realm expert like Lin Qing over. Moreover, Jun Wuya and the other three had already discussed and decided to follow the plan. Hearing Jun Wuya's words, Lin Qing respectfully nodded. Then, Jun Wuya's gaze landed on Li Xiao and Dao Xiong. His expression was calm as he said, "I'll leave everything to the two of you." The space-time tunnel had been opened, but Jun Wuya and the other three couldn't all enter. Jun Wuya and Luo Xing had to stay behind to stabilize the space-time tunnel, so only Dao Xiong and Li Xiao could enter the Wood World. Hearing Jun Wuya's words, Li Xiao nodded seriously this time and replied, "Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to them." The most important goal of this trip to the Wood World was to rescue Xiao Chen and the other three. Jun Wuya, Li Xiao, and the others were very clear about this. With that said, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong didn't waste any more time. In a flash, they disappeared into the space-time tunnel. After Li Xiao and Dao Xiong entered the space-time tunnel, the originally forcefully opened space-time tunnel began to fluctuate violently. There were even signs of it collapsing. Jun Wuya and Luo Xing were already prepared for this. The two of them sat down cross-legged in the sky. At the same time, their majestic spiritual energy continued to enter the space-time tunnel. Soon, the space-time tunnel slowly stabilized. With Jun Wuya and Luo Xing's help, the space-time tunnel could indeed allow Dao Xiong and Li Xiao to pass through safely. As emperors, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong didn't take a starship. With their cultivation, they could easily pass through the space-time tunnel with their physical bodies. As long as the space-time tunnel didn't collapse, they would be fine. Soon, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong safely passed through the space-time tunnel and arrived in the Wood World. Frowning slightly, Dao Xiong spoke first, "The will of the heavenly way of the Wood World is dead?" Dao Xiong immediately sensed that the will of the heavenly way didn't exist in the Wood World. Hearing this, Li Xiao nodded slightly and said, he was killed by Enlitian. This guy even killed the will of the heavenly way. Isn't he afraid of Tenzu's punishment? Dao Xiong said coldly. Are you afraid of Tenzu's punishment? Li Xiao asked softly. Tenzu was the will of the heavenly way of the great thousand world. It was said that he was the first will of the heavenly way to be born, and the will of the heavenly way of the other worlds were his children. Therefore, the cultivators of the great thousand world called him Tenzu. As the will of the heavenly way of the great thousand world, Tenzu's strength was naturally much stronger than the will of the heavenly way of the other worlds. However, as emperors, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong were not afraid of Tenzu. To put it bluntly, emperors were existences that transcended the laws of heaven and earth. Moreover, what was the origin and meaning of the 10 great Ling Tian sects? To put it bluntly, they were existences that even the will of the heavenly way feared. The 10 great Ling Tian sects were indeed able to make Tenzu fear them. Even for Tenzu, if he wanted to destroy a Ling Tian sect, it would not be an easy task. In fact, it was very likely that both sides would suffer losses. Therefore, Li Xiao said such words. Dao Xiong ignored his words and said without any change in his expression, cut the crap. Let's save them. Dao Xiong's character was indeed a little stubborn. Hearing this, Li Xiao did not object. The two of them took a step forward and instantly disappeared from the spot. About 4 hours later, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong appeared outside the evil ghost continent. Looking at the array that enveloped the evil ghost continent, Dao Xiong did not say anything and directly slashed out with his hand. This array was cast by Li Chan. However, in front of an emperor like Dao Xiong, it was not very effective. With one strike, Dao Xiong directly broke the array. Seeing this, Li Xiao said helplessly, "Why are you in such a hurry? I have an array plate here. Can't you just open it?" This array was given to Li Chun by Li Xiao. Therefore, Li Xiao naturally had an array plate with him. Using the array plate, he could completely open the array. Previously, Li Xiao's soul doppelganger had entered the evil ghost continent in this way. However, Dao Xiong did not give Li Xiao any time to use the array plate. Before Li Xiao could speak, Dao Xiong had already forcefully broken the array. Hearing Li Xiao's words, Dao Xiong said indifferently, "I don't have time to waste here. Let's go and save them." "You? Sigh, what a pity. The price of this array is not low." Hearing Dao Xiong's words, Li Xiao shook his head helplessly. However, he still followed Dao Xiong and directly entered the evil ghost continent. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21:15. Dao Xiong destroyed the talisman array that enveloped the Nether Ghost Continent with a chop of his hand. Then, the two of them entered the Nether Ghost Continent. Enlitian was naturally the first to notice Li Xiao and Dao Xiong's arrival. The divine consciousness of an emperor was extremely powerful, and it could easily cover a vast area. For someone like Enlitian, it was not difficult for his divine consciousness to cover half of the Dark Ghost Continent. Coupled with the fact that the talisman array was destroyed, Enlitian naturally sensed it immediately. In fact, it was precisely because of the terrifying divine consciousness of an emperor that Xiaochen had taken the initiative to go to Taisong City. It seemed like he was walking right into a trap, but there was no other way. All along, Enlitian had not been too concerned about capturing Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao. Instead, he had left the matter to Yinsheng. On one hand, he intended to train Yinsheng so that he could personally experience the gap between himself and the geniuses of the Great Thousand World. On the other hand, Enlitian was not in the mood to pay attention to such trivial matters. Of course, if Yinsheng was unable to capture Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao, Enlitian would definitely take action at the last moment. In the face of an emperor who could not leave the Dark Ghost Continent, it was almost impossible for him to escape. As long as he used his divine consciousness, he could cover half of the Dark Ghost Continent. Under such circumstances, there was almost no place for Xiaochen to hide. Therefore, instead of waiting for Enlitian to take action and then being captured, it was better to do the opposite. the divine minds of venerable sovereigns were too extensive, so there was basically no chance of escaping from them. Xiaochen knew this very well. After the formation was broken, only a few lonely houses were left standing on top of the ruins of Taisong City. Among them, the most eye-catching one was naturally the towering hall. Lidian, who was originally sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes slowly. A hint of a smile flashed in his eyes as he whispered softly, "Is he here?" As he spoke, Lidian slowly rose to his feet and took a step forward. His figure instantly appeared outside the Great Hall. As soon as Lidian stepped out of the Great Hall, two extremely terrifying auras swept over from afar. It was as though their auras had enveloped an area of several million miles. Yinxing rushed to Litian's side as soon as he sensed the terrifying presence. These two presences were clearly not weaker than Litian's. Yinxing was a little shocked. He looked at Lidian and was about to say something. "Master." However, he was immediately interrupted by Lidian. "There's no need to panic." Apart from Litian, Yinxing had never come into contact with any other Emperor Realm Masters, so it was understandable that he was a little nervous. As Lidian spoke, two figures appeared in the sky. They were none other than Li Xiao and Dao Xiong, who had rushed over from the Great Thousand World. When the two of them appeared, their gazes immediately fell on Litian's hand. Li Xiao was the first to speak. "Lidian, I didn't expect you to fake your death all these years." "Ha, junior brother, you were determined to kill me back then. What else could I have done if I hadn't done so?" Lidian smiled faintly. "Lidian, I'm not your junior brother. From the moment you killed my master, our relationship was severed," Li Xiao shouted angrily when he heard Lidian still address him as his junior brother. After so many years, the two of them finally met again. However, Li Xiao's hatred for Lidian did not diminish in the slightest. Litian's smile did not diminish when he saw Li Xiao's overflowing hatred. However, at this moment, Dao Xiong, who had been silent all this while, shouted coldly. "Cut the crap. Lidian, where's my son?" Dao Xiong was not interested in the feud between Lidian and Li Xiao. His only goal was to save his son, Xiaochen, and the others. When Lidian heard Dao Xiong's words, he looked at Dao Xiong and chuckled. "So it's Zhangtian Saber Venerable. Don't worry, your son is doing very well." Although Lidian was not familiar with Dao Xiong, he still recognized him. After all, Dao Xiong was already an emperor in Litian's era. After hearing Litian's reply, Dao Xiong said in a deep voice, "In that case, let them go." He immediately asked Lidian to release them. However, Lidian shook his head and rejected Dao Xiong's request without even thinking about it. "There's no hurry. If you want to release them, you should at least talk about the conditions. Both of you, please come in." He gestured for the two of them to enter the hall to discuss. Hearing this, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong looked at each other and followed Lidian into the hall. Xiaochen, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, and Dao Ju were now in Litian's hands. Therefore, Lidian would definitely want to talk about the conditions. Dao Ju and Li Xiao had already expected this, so they were not surprised. After following Lidian into the hall, Lidian asked Yinxing to personally pour wine for Dao Xiong and Li Xiao. He then sat down on the main seat and smiled as he said, "Sirs, this is a good wine that I have kept for many years. Have a taste." After saying that, Lidian raised his cup and drank it. However, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong obviously did not have the same mentality. Although Litian's wine was indeed good and fragrant, the two of them were not in the mood to drink in the current situation. This was especially so for Dao Xiong, who had always been worried about his son's safety. Therefore, after hearing Litian's words, Dao Xiong immediately shouted in a deep voice. "Cut the crap. Lidian, just say it. What will it take for you to let them go?" Dao Xiong obviously did not have the slightest bit of patience. In response, Lidian smiled and said, "The conditions are actually very simple. Just let me go back to the Great Thousand World. As long as I safely reach the Great Thousand World, I will naturally let them go. Since Dao Xiong and Li Zhao's original bodies could descend to the Wood World, it meant that they had already solved the space-time channel between the Wood World and the Great Thousand World. Since Li Xiao and Dao Xiong could pass through, Yin Litian could naturally pass through as well. Yin Litian's condition was to go to the Great Thousand World. As long as he safely reached the Great Thousand World, he would let them go. Hearing Yin Litian's words, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong were slightly stunned. It was not that Yin Litian's request was difficult. On the contrary, Yin Litian's request was too simple. Just to return to the Great Thousand World? It was such a simple request. Was Yin Litian not afraid that after releasing Xiao Chen and the other three, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong, Li Xiao and the others would join forces to deal with him? One had to know that although it was extremely difficult to kill an emperor, it was not impossible for 4 emperors to join forces to kill Yin Litian. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 21:16. Yin Litian's request was simply to return to the Great Thousand World. Both Li Xiao and Dao Xiong were surprised by this. They thought that Yin Litian would ask for something more difficult, but they did not expect his request to be so simple. Yin Litian's request was simply to return to the Great Thousand World. Both Li Xiao and Dao Xiong were surprised by this. They thought that Yin Litian would ask for something more difficult, but they did not expect his request to be so simple. Seeing that both of them were surprised, Yin Litian smiled and said, "Why? Is it a simple request? I don't think you have a reason to reject it, right?" Yin Litian knew that his request was simple, and Li Xiao and Dao Xiong had no reason to reject it. Hearing this, Li Zhao's eyes were still cold. He looked at Yin Litian coldly and said, "The request is simple, but can you guarantee that you will let them go when we reach the Great Thousand World?" "Of course. Since we're already in the Great Thousand World, why would I keep those 4 little fellows around?" Yin Litian nodded with a smile. They could not guess what Yin Litian wanted to do. Now that Yin Litian was heading to the Great Thousand World, it would not end well. At the very least, Li Xiao would not let him go. Even if Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dao Xiong did not attack Yin Litian, it would be difficult for Yin Litian to deal with Li Xiao alone. After all, Yin Litian was alone, and Li Xiao was the palace master of the Heavenly Policy Palace. Yin Litian would not be able to deal with Li Xiao if he was hunted down by Li Xiao. They could not guess what Yin Litian was thinking, but since things had come to this, Dao Xiong and Li Xiao could only agree to Yin Litian's request for the time being and allow him to go to the Great Thousand World. Seeing that both of them nodded, Yin Litian raised his cup and smiled. "In that case, let's go." With that, Yin Litian drained his cup and reached a consensus. Soon, Xiao Chen and the other 3 were brought out of the dungeon by Yin Litian. Outside the hall, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong finally saw the 4 of them. Judging from their appearances, Yin Litian didn't make things difficult for them. Aside from their cultivation being sealed, they didn't suffer any other injuries. Yin Litian's aura enveloped Xiao Chen's group of 4. To prevent Li Xiao and Blade Xiong from snatching them away, Yin Litian did not let his guard down. He paid close attention to the 2's movements. As long as the 2 made the slightest move, Yin Litian could instantly kill off Xiao Chen's group. It was impossible for him to snatch Dao Ju away. Seeing that his son was fine, Dao Xiong secretly heaved a sigh of relief. However, when he saw that Dao Ju was still smiling, Dao Xiong coldly shouted, "Little brat, you've already become his prisoner and you still have the face to smile?" Dao Xiong had a love-hate relationship with Dao Ju. There was nothing he could do about it. After all, he only had one son. What could he do if he didn't love him? However, Dao Ju's personality had always been a headache for Dao Xiong ever since he was a child. Dao Xiong had spent a lot of effort to come to the Wood Realm to save his son. However, when he saw Dao Ju, he saw him hugging Xiao Chen and laughing as if nothing had happened. This caused Dao Xiong's anger to soar. Facing his father's angry shout, Dao Ju shrugged helplessly and said, "What can I do? He's an emperor. Don't tell me you want me to fight him to a draw? Isn't it normal for me to be captured?" In Dao Ju's opinion, being captured by Yin Litian wasn't something shameful. After all, he was an emperor. No matter how heaven-defying Dao Ju's talent was, he was only a Dao realm cultivator. Wasn't it normal for him to be captured? Dao Ju's words weren't wrong. However, Dao Xiong couldn't stand Dao Ju's attitude. He immediately shouted angrily, "Little brat, are you itching for a beating?" After saying that, Dao Xiong made a move to attack. However, he was stopped by Yin Litian. Yin Litian stood in front of Dao Ju and the others and said indifferently, "Dao Xiong, you and your father can talk about this when we get back. Now is not the time." Regardless of whether Dao Xiong really wanted to beat up Dao Ju or not, Yin Litian obviously wouldn't let Dao Xiong get close to Dao Ju and the others at this time. If Dao Xiong suddenly saved the four of them, Yin Litian would be in a difficult position. Dao Xiong's eyes flashed with anger when Yin Litian stopped him. However, he didn't flare up. He just glared fiercely at Dao Ju and said, "Little brat, I'll deal with you when we get back. TCH, if you have the ability, come at me now." However, Dao Ju curled his lips and said, "You, little brat, say that again?" Dao Xiong was furious when he heard Dao Ju's words. However, with Yin Litian's obstruction, Dao Xiong obviously couldn't attack. Dao Ju also understood this, so he didn't show any fear. "I said, if you have the ability, come at me now," Dao Ju said again. Dao Xiong was so angry that his face turned red. However, when he looked at Yin Litian in front of him, Dao Xiong forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart. Originally, he was captured by Yin Litian, but now, facing Dao Xiong, Yin Litian actually became Dao Ju's protector. Seeing Dao Ju and Dao Xiong quarrel endlessly, Xiao Chen and the others on the side were extremely helpless. This father and son pair were really strange. Dao Xiong originally came to save them, but who would have thought that when the father and son met, things would develop like this? In the end, even Yin Litian had to speak up. "You and your father's matter, go home and solve it yourselves. Right now, I think we should deal with our matter first." Yin Litian couldn't stand Dao Xiong and Dao Ju anymore. Firstly, Yin Litian was afraid that there was a trap, and that Dao Xiong would take this opportunity to suddenly save them. Secondly, Yin Litian was really not interested in the father and son's quarrel. Hearing this, Dao Xiong could only suppress the anger in his heart. He glared fiercely at Dao Ju and said, "Little brat, go home and wait." Dao Ju curled his lips, while Dao Xiong suppressed the anger in his heart and didn't say a word. Seeing that the father and son had finally stopped quarreling, Yin Litian said to Li Xiao, "Let's go, junior brother." "Don't call me junior brother. Remember what you said." "Once we reach the Great Thousand World, let them go," Li Xiao replied coldly. He didn't acknowledge his relationship with Yin Litian at all. Yin Litian smiled in response and didn't say anything. Then, Yin Litian asked Yin Xing to send over a spaceship, and Yin Xing led Xiao Chen and the others onto the spaceship. Yin Litian did the same. As for Li Xiao and Dao Xiong, they didn't board the spaceship because Yin Litian didn't allow it. Before reaching the Great Thousand World, Yin Litian obviously wouldn't allow them to come into contact with Xiao Chen and the others. Therefore, Yin Litian was very careful in this regard. Li Xiao and Dao Xiong had no choice but to follow the agreement and return to the Great Thousand World with Yin Litian. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21:17. According to Yin Litian's request, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong accompanied Yin Litian back to the Great Thousand World. Although they did not know what Yin Litian had up his sleeves, Xiao Chen and the other three were still in Yin Litian's hands. Li Xiao and Dao Xiong had no choice but to compromise. It was not that they had not thought of forcefully rescuing Xiao Chen and the other three, but they had not found an opportunity. From the beginning to the end, Yin Litian had locked onto Xiao Chen and the other three. Even if Li Xiao and Dao Xiong attacked, Yin Litian would be able to kill Xiao Chen and the other three immediately. Forcefully rescuing them was too risky, and the chances of failure were too high. In addition, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong's main goal was to rescue Xiao Chen and the other three. As such, they could not take the risk. They could only compromise for the time being and make plans after returning to the Great Thousand World. Li Xiao and Dao Xiong stood outside the spaceship and followed it back to the Great Thousand World. As they were on the spaceship, it took them a long time to return. However, after 3 days, they successfully passed through the space passage and returned to the Great Thousand World. In the Great Thousand World, Jun Wuya and Luo Xing were still stabilizing the space passage. However, at this moment, a spaceship slowly flew out of the space passage. Then, Li Xiao and Dao Xiong appeared in front of everyone. After leaving the space passage and entering the Great Thousand World, the spaceship slowly came to a stop. Li Xiao and Dao Xiong came to Jun Wuya and Luo Xing and briefly explained the situation to them. When they heard that Yin Litian's request was to return to the Great Thousand World, Jun Wuya and Luo Xing were confused. At this moment, everyone looked at the spaceship. Under everyone's gaze, Yin Litian slowly walked to the deck. Behind him were Yin Sheng, Xiao Chen, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, and Dao Ju. Seeing that Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were fine, Jun Wuya and Luo Xing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Dao Ju spoke first. Yin Litian, can you let them go? They had already arrived at the Great Thousand Realms as promised. Dao Xiong signaled Yin Litian to release them. Hearing this, Yin Litian smiled and said, naturally. Dao Xiong, Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Li Xiao were stunned when they saw Yin Litian agree to let them go so easily. They couldn't believe that Yin Litian would agree so easily. One had to know that there were 4 emperors present, and the only trump card in Yin Litian's hand was Xiao Chen and the other 3. If he let Xiao Chen and the other 3 go, Yin Litian would have nothing else that could threaten Li Xiao and the other 3 emperors. When the time came, Yin Litian would be besieged by the 4 emperors. However, Yin Litian didn't seem to be afraid of Jun Wuya and the other 3. He looked around and didn't seem to care about the experts of the 4 forces at all. Yin Litian said with a faint smile on his face. The Great Thousand Realms is still so attractive after so many years. It's no wonder that people from countless worlds want to go to the Great Thousand Realms. It's indeed a place for heroes. After so many years, Yin Litian seemed to be in a good mood when he returned to the Great Thousand Realms. In his eyes, the Great Thousand Realms was his true stage. Hearing Yin Litian's exclamation, Li Xiao said impatiently, cut the crap. Let them go. Li Xiao urged Yin Litian to let them go. Yin Litian smiled and said, Junior brother, you're still so impatient. He looked completely relaxed, as if Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors in front of him weren't a threat to him at all. Yin Litian didn't go back on his words. He waved his hand gently, and a gentle force immediately dragged Xiao Chen and the other 3 emperors over to Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors. Yin Litian released the 4 emperors without any hesitation. Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors were still in disbelief when they saw Xiao Chen and the other 3 emperors return to their side. Yin Litian didn't go back on his words. Of course, this was normal. After all, Yin Litian's original intention wasn't to offend Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors. Therefore, Yin Litian had never harmed Xiao Chen and the other 3 emperors. There was no need to mention Li Xiao. After all, Li Xiao and Yin Litian were mortal enemies due to the incident with Emperor Ming Feng. However, Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dao Xiong had no enmity with Yin Litian. Even when the Yin Ghost clan and the Heavenly Policy Mansion fought fiercely, Jun Wuyuan and Luo Xing didn't take any action. Therefore, Yin Litian returned Xiao Chen and the other 3 emperors to Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors unharmed. He was planning for the future. As promised, Jun Wuya released Xiao Chen and the others. At this moment, Jun Wuya stood in front of Xiao Chen to protect him. He looked at Yin Litian and said indifferently, You spent so much effort just to return to the greater world? That's right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to kill the heavenly way of the wood world. Yin Litian smiled. The will of the heavenly way of the wood world? When Jun Wuya and the other 3 emperors heard this, their expressions changed. They finally realized that Yin Litian's goal from the beginning was to return to the Great Thousand Realms. Back then, Lydian faked his death and escaped to the Wood World to avoid Li Xiao. He even destroyed the space-time passage between the Wood World and the Great Thousand Realms. Now, Lydian had successfully refined the mountain river diagram and wanted to return to the Great Thousand Realms. However, the space-time passage between the two worlds had just been formed and couldn't allow Lydian to pass through. As a result, Lydian had to wait for the space-time passage to stabilize if he wanted to return to the Great Thousand Realms. However, this wait was very long and he might not be able to return to the Great Thousand Realms even after hundreds of years. Therefore, Lydian killed the will of the heavenly way of the Wood World. It was only now that Jun Wuya and the other three emperors understood Lydian's intention of killing the will of the heavenly way of the Wood World. If the will of the heavenly way of the Wood World still existed, then even if Jun Wuya and the other three emperors took action, they wouldn't be able to open the space-time passage between the Wood World and the Great Thousand Realms. This was because the will of the heavenly way of the Wood World wouldn't allow it. When the time came, he would definitely destroy it from the other side of the space-time passage. Therefore, in order to allow Jun Wuya and the other three emperors to open the space-time passage, Lydian killed the will of the heavenly way of the Wood World. This way, no one in the Wood World would be able to stop Jun Wuya and the other three emperors. Jun Wuya smiled bitterly when he thought about how he had been tricked by Lydian from the beginning. However, Li Xiao, who was beside him, said with murderous intent. After saying so much and spending so much effort, you just want to go to the Great Thousand Realms. However, what can you do? Although you have returned to the Great Thousand Realms, your death is not far away. Lydian, you killed Master back then. It's time for you to pay your debts. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 21:18. Xiao Chen and the other three had already been released by Lydian. Now that Lydian no longer had anything that Li Xiao was afraid of, Li Xiao naturally didn't hesitate to reveal the killing intent in his heart. Xiao Chen and the other three had already been released by Lydian. Now that Lydian no longer had anything that Li Xiao was afraid of, Li Xiao naturally didn't hesitate to reveal the killing intent in his heart. Li Xiao had long wanted to kill Lydian to avenge his master. Back then, he thought that Lydian was already dead. Who would have thought that Lydian was still alive and that he had been deceived for so many years? As a result, the killing intent in Li Xiao's heart naturally increased instead of decreasing. However, Lydian wasn't nervous at all when he heard Li Xiao's words. He chuckled and said, "Junior brother, I just released these 4 little guys as promised. Don't you think it's a little too much for you to turn your back on me?" "Too much? Lydian, you killed our master. It's only right for me to kill you. There's nothing too much about it." Li Xiao shouted in a deep voice when he heard Lydian's words. At the same time, a terrifying aura gradually spread out from his body. Li Xiao's aura was terrifying. It was obvious that he was ready to attack. Upon seeing this, Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dao Xiong looked at each other and asked Xiao Chen and the others to step back. It seemed like the three of them were also planning to lend Li Xiao a hand. In fact, Lydian and Jun Wuya didn't have any enmity with them. They just wanted to help Li Xiao. Moreover, after this incident, the three of them didn't have a good impression of Lydian. Of course, since Xiao Chen and the others weren't hurt, they didn't really offend them. Sensing that Jun Wuya and the other two were about to attack, Lydian wasn't nervous at all. He glanced at the 4 of them and chuckled. "Do you really want to kill me that badly? Unfortunately, you won't be able to kill me." After saying that, a painting scroll slowly flew out from Lydian's body. When Li Xiao saw this painting scroll, his face immediately darkened. The mountain river painting, the scroll was naturally the supreme treasure of Li Xiao's master, the mountain and river diagram. After so many years, the mountain and river diagram had been completely refined by Lydian. Previously, the mountain and river diagram on the mountain and river diagram had been completely obliterated by Lydian. Now, the mountain and river diagram was Lydian's supreme treasure. After so many years, Li Xiao felt extremely conflicted when he saw it. At the same time, as a disciple of the emperor's disciple, he was very clear about the power of the mountain river painting scroll. Seeing Yin Lydian bring out the mountain river painting scroll, Li Xiao's face turned extremely gloomy. Sensing the change in Li Xiao's expression, Yin Lydian smiled and said, "Junior brother, you should be very clear about the power of the mountain river painting. With it, do you think you can kill me?" The mountain river painting scroll was Yin Lydian's trump card, and it was also the reason why he wasn't afraid of Jun Wuya and the other three. Although the mountain river painting scroll couldn't allow Yin Lydian to fight against Jun Wuya and the other three on his own, it could still help him escape with Yin Sheng and Yin Lydian. The painting scroll slowly unfolded, and suddenly, a lifelike scenery of mountains and rivers appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas in the painting were all very real. Moreover, if one looked closely, it wasn't difficult to notice that the scenery in the mountain river painting was exactly the same as the Great Thousand World. After drawing the entire Great Thousand World into the painting, Li Xiao couldn't help but make a move. At the same time, he said to Jun Wuya and the other two in a low voice, "Don't let him use the mountain river painting." They couldn't give Yin Lydian a chance to use the mountain river painting. However, as soon as Li Xiao finished speaking, the mountain river painting scroll completely unfolded. Yin Lydian said with a mocking look on his face, "Junior brother, there will be plenty of time for us to settle this matter. I won't accompany you today." Having said that, Yin Lydian grabbed Yin Sheng, and the two of them entered the mountain river painting and disappeared from where they were standing. As Yin Lydian and Yin Sheng disappeared, the mountain river painting slowly turned into nothingness. Soon, the mountain river painting, Yin Lydian, and Yin Sheng disappeared completely. This was the first terrifying thing about the mountain river painting, which was that it could teleport people. Just like the spatial compass, the mountain river painting could also teleport people. However, compared to the spatial compass, the teleportation ability of the mountain river painting was obviously more heaven-defying. First of all, the mountain river painting could teleport people more than one person. Moreover, using the mountain river painting, one could teleport to almost any place in the Great Thousand World. As long as it was a place drawn in the mountain river painting, one could reach it in an instant through the mountain river painting. This alone was enough to show how terrifying the mountain river painting was. It was simply a life-saving artifact. With the mountain river painting, one's life was almost guaranteed. It was no wonder that Yin Lydian wasn't nervous even when facing Jun Wuya and the other three sovereigns. With the mountain river painting, Yin Lydian was confident that Jun Wuya and the other three wouldn't be able to stop him. Yin Lydian didn't even have the chance to make a move. In front of Jun Wuya and the other three, Yin Lydian left with Yin Sheng in a relaxed manner. In the face of Yin Lydian's departure, Li Xiao was undoubtedly the angriest. His eyes were full of anger. In this world, other than Yin Lydian, Li Xiao was probably the most familiar with the mountain river painting. From Yin Lydian's actions just now, Li Xiao was sure that Yin Lydian had completely refined the mountain river painting after so many years. In this way, it would be even more difficult to kill him in the future. Yin Lydian. Li Xiao gritted his teeth and shouted. Upon hearing Li Xiao's words, Jun Wuya and the other two felt helpless. The three of them had heard of the mountain river painting. Now that they had seen the ability of the mountain river painting with their own eyes, even Jun Wuya couldn't help but sigh. The mountain river painting is indeed a heaven-defying treasure. Yin Lydian left. Perhaps he knew from the beginning that this would be the outcome. With the mountain river painting, Yin Lydian wasn't afraid of being surrounded by Jun Wuya and the other three because he wouldn't give them a chance to make a move. Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, and Dao Xiong didn't feel much about Yin Lydian's departure. Only Li Xiao was furious. They didn't know where Yin Lydian had gone. With the mountain river painting, Yin Lydian had the ability to go to any corner of the Great Thousand World. It would be very difficult to find him now unless he jumped out himself. Without staying for too long, Dao Xiong quickly left with Dao Ju. Jun Wuya and Luo Xing stayed behind because Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao still needed to borrow the Heavenly Policy Mansion's Heavenly Policy secret realm. Looking at Li Xiao, who was still furious, Junwei tried to persuade him. "Alright, this matter will be resolved one day. You and Litian will have a battle in the future. It's useless to think too much now. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 21:19. Li Xiao was infuriated. After all, the Heavenly Policy Hall had been utterly defeated during this trip to the Wood Realm. They had been completely tricked by Litian. Furthermore, the Heavenly Policy Hall had also paid a hefty price for this. Although it wasn't a serious blow, it was still very troublesome. The 4 Dao Realm Elders had indeed made Li Xiao's heart ache. However, the real trouble was the numerous martialists who had come to participate in the assessment. Many of these people were disciples of some large family clans. Although the strength behind them couldn't pose any threat to the Heavenly Policy Hall, the Heavenly Policy Hall definitely had to give them an explanation for the deaths of so many people in the Wood Realm. To put it bluntly, this explanation was also compensation. Li Xiao snorted coldly. His face was gloomy and a cold light flickered in his eyes. However, after hearing Junwei's words, he still nodded and said, "Let's go. We'll talk when we get back." Just as Junwei had said, Litian had already escaped. It wouldn't be easy to find him again. Therefore, Li Xiao had no other choice. The group returned to the Heavenly Policy Hall. Due to the incident in the Wood Realm, the assessment of the Heavenly Policy Hall could be considered a complete failure. Although a portion of the new disciples had been rescued, most of them had perished in the Wood Realm because of the incident in the Wood Realm. Perhaps to compensate them, Li Xiao directly gave the order to make an exception for those who had survived and allowed them to join the Heavenly Policy Hall. The martialists who had survived were naturally overjoyed when they heard this news. They felt as though they had been given a new lease on life. Although the trip to the Wood Realm had left these martialists with a lingering fear, those who were fortunate enough to survive had also benefited from the disaster. Those who originally didn't have the qualifications to join the Heavenly Policy Hall had now fulfilled their wishes and become a member of the Heavenly Policy Hall. Of course, this matter didn't have much to do with Xiao Chen and the others. After returning to the Heavenly Policy Hall, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had been waiting to enter the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. As for other matters, the two of them weren't interested and didn't care. This was originally an internal matter of the Heavenly Policy Mansion, so it was not appropriate for them to interfere. Junwei, Luo Xing, Xiao Chen, and Xiao Xiao stayed in a cave residence. It had been 7 days since they returned from the Wood World. During these 7 days, the matters in the Heavenly Policy Mansion were proceeding in an orderly manner. As for Litian, there was no news of him. No one knew where he had gone through the mountain and river diagram. However, one thing was certain. Litian was definitely still in the Great Thousand World. Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had also tried to guess what the plan would be after Lunar Day. However, no matter how hard they racked their brains, they still couldn't figure out what would happen after Lunar Day. Under the full pursuit of Li Xiao and the Heavenly Policy Palace, it would be very difficult for Litian to do anything in the Great Wide World. No one knew why Litian was so insistent on returning to the Great Wide World. The matter of Litian seemed to have come to an end for the time being. On this day, Li Xiao personally visited and told Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao that the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm would open the next day. At that time, the two of them could enter the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm to cultivate. Everyone sat in a circle in the courtyard. First, they talked about the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. Then, Li Xiao said to Junwei and Luo Xing, "Thank you very much for this time." Li Xiao thanked them because of Litian's matter. However, Junwei and Luo Xing didn't say anything about it. It could be seen that Li Xiao's mood was very low during this period. He looked unusually tired. Therefore, he didn't stay for long. Soon, Li Xiao got up and left. After a silent night, early the next morning, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were personally led by Li Chun to the entrance of the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. As for Junwei and Luo Xing, they didn't go with them. Along the way, Li Chun told Xiao Chen and Luo Xing in detail about the things to take note of in the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. When the three of them arrived, many Heavenly Policy Palace's students had already gathered at the entrance of the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. These students were the Heavenly Policy Palace's elite students. There weren't many of them, only a few hundred of them. However, their cultivation had already reached the comprehension state. Although they couldn't be compared to Xiao Chen and the other monstrous geniuses, they could be considered outstanding in the younger generation of the great wide world. They were worthy of being called geniuses. Unfortunately, when these hundreds of people saw Li Chun and the other two, they all had a longing look on their faces. At the same time, they cupped their hands and bowed to the three of them. They were geniuses, but there was no way they could be compared to Xiao Chen and the other two. Everyone fantasized about having the talent and combat strength of Xiao Chen and the other two. Unfortunately, this was only a fantasy. Under the respectful gazes of the crowd, Xiao Chen and the other two walked to the front of the crowd. The many disciples behind them couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Is that the sect leader of the sword sect, Xiao Chen?" And the woman beside him. "Is she the Moon Palace's holy maiden, Xiao Xiao?" "That's right. It's the two of them. Didn't you see that even the young mansion master personally appeared?" If it wasn't Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao, who else would be able to make the young mansion master personally appear to receive them? The crowd whispered among themselves. It was obvious that Li Chun had a high prestige in the Heavenly Policy Palace. However, the appearance of Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao also caused quite a commotion among the crowd. They didn't pay much attention to the discussions of the people behind them. When the time came, the entrance to the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm was successfully opened. However, at this moment, no one dared to rush into the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. This was because Xiao Chen, Xiao Xiao, and Li Chun had yet to move. Naturally, the crowd could only wait patiently. Now that the entrance had been opened, Li Chun said to Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao calmly, "Both of you, I'll stop here. I wish both of you a great harvest this time. Brotherly, you're too polite. In that case, both of us will make a move first." Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded in response. Xiao Xiao also nodded at Li Chun. Then, the two of them walked into the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. After Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm, the group of disciples from the Heavenly Policy Palace finally entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. As the most famous cultivation secret realm in the Heavenly Policy Palace, many people were excited to be able to enter it to cultivate. Moreover, the reason why everyone was even more excited this time was because of Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao. Being able to cultivate with the famous supreme talents in the Great Thousand World was probably the dream of countless young people. In fact, if they were lucky enough to be able to exchange a few words with Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao, or even get acquainted with them, it would be like a carp leaping over the dragon gate and reaching the heavens in a single bound. As such, everyone was naturally excited. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21-20. Everyone swarmed into the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. However, it was a pity that Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had already disappeared by the time they entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. Everyone swarmed into the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. However, it was a pity that Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had already disappeared by the time they entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. After entering the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm, one would realize that this place was like a starry sky filled with countless stars. These stars weren't real. They were the most precious existences in the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. They were known as martial stars. These martial stars were extremely helpful for cultivators to awaken their physique and abilities. Among the numerous cultivation secret realms in the Great Thousand World, there were only 3 secret realms that contained martial stars. The Heavenly Policy Secret Realm was one of them. As for the remaining 2, one was controlled by the Saber sect while the other was controlled by the Shrines. The most important thing to cultivate in the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm was naturally to refine martial stars. The more martial stars one refined, the higher one's growth would be. This was something that everyone knew. However, it wasn't an easy task to refine a martial star. The martial star contained a very special power. During the initial stage of refining, one would experience an illusion. In the illusion, one had to defeat an illusion beast in order to continue refining. Once one was defeated by an illusion beast, one's soul would be injured. Then, one wouldn't be able to refine a new martial star. Based on the size of the martial star, there were strong and weak illusion beasts in the illusion. The strong ones could even rival an end realm expert. Everyone had a clear understanding of the heavenly policy's secret realm before they entered. Hence, they weren't too surprised when they saw so many martial stars in the heavenly policy's secret realm. On the contrary, many of them started to search for suitable martial stars to refine. At the start, everyone started from the smallest martial star. After all, if they were defeated by the illusion beasts in the environment right from the start, then this trip to the heavenly policy's secret realm would naturally end in failure. Obviously, no one was willing to accept such an outcome. Starting from the smallest martial star, the refining process would be much more stable. However, even though they were very careful, several dozen of the elite students who had entered the heavenly policy's secret realm failed in the end. Unable to defeat even the weakest phantasmal beast, the originally dazed students suddenly spat out mouthfuls of blood. Then, their faces instantly turned pale, and their eyes were filled with unwillingness as they said, "Damn it, he actually has a comprehension stage cultivation." Even the weakest martial star's phantom beast had the cultivation of the comprehension state. This really shocked everyone. Moreover, although the battle was carried out in the phantom realm, they would still have to pay a heavy price if they lost, especially if they couldn't continue to refine other martial stars. This was a fact that everyone found hard to accept. Some of the people who failed were extremely unwilling. It was extremely difficult for them to obtain a chance to enter the heavenly book's secret realm. If they failed like this, no one would be able to accept it. Therefore, under such circumstances, some people chose to take the risk. Clearly, they had failed in their first attempt. Logically speaking, they shouldn't be able to continue refining martial stars. However, these people didn't have any intention of stopping. They were already prepared to give it a try. A student who had already failed came in front of another martial star. Just as he was about to refine it, another person beside him spoke up to stop him. "Are you crazy? You have already failed. Your soul is severely injured, and you still want to refine it? Do you want to die?" This disciple spoke up to stop him. Under the situation where one's soul was severely injured, if he still insisted on refining the martial star, he was definitely courting death. This was because according to past experience, even an end-realm expert wouldn't be able to withstand 2 consecutive soul injuries. Even an end-realm expert wouldn't be able to withstand it, let alone a comprehension state expert. Therefore, in the process of refining a martial star, once one failed, they could only choose to retreat. Unfortunately, facing the obstruction, this student's eyes were red as he said, "I don't need you to care. This time, I will definitely break through my physique. Do you want to die?" Hearing this person coldly shouted. Then, he stretched out his hand to pull this student. Unfortunately, this student had already lost his mind. After waiting for such a long time and paying an unimaginable price, he finally had the chance to enter the heavenly policy's secret realm. However, if he gave up without obtaining anything, how could this student be willing to accept it? Therefore, facing the obstruction of others, this student didn't care and directly flung away his companion's arm. Then, he grabbed the martial star in front of him and roughly refined it into his body. After the martial star was refined into the student's body, the student's eyes quickly became lifeless. However, not long after, at most a few dozen breaths of time, the student suddenly spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Soon after, his eyes lost their luster. His physical body was unharmed, and there wasn't even a trace of injury. However, his entire person didn't have any signs of life. It was obvious that this student had still failed in his second battle with the illusory beasts. Seeing this student die, the companion who tried to stop him was stunned. Then, he hurriedly held onto his body and continuously shouted, as if he wanted to use this to wake this student up. Unfortunately, no matter how he shouted, this student remained indifferent. At this moment, another person came before this person and said with a sorrowful expression, "It's useless." After being heavily injured by the illusory beasts twice, his soul has already collapsed. There's no saving him. This person's soul had already completely collapsed. Although his physical body was still there, it was only an empty shell. He was completely dead. Even a golden immortal would find it difficult to save him. Within the heavenly policy's secret realm, one had to act according to one's ability. Once one failed, one could not continue to refine a martial star. Otherwise, one would definitely die. This was something that the elders of the Heavenly Policy Mansion had always emphasized. Unfortunately, because this student was unwilling to give up, he paid with his life in the end. After this student's soul was shattered and he died, the other students who had failed in their first attempt were also unwilling to give up and wanted to try again. However, now, no one dared to do so. Perhaps before, they still had some hope that if they failed the first time, they would be able to succeed the second time. However, now that the reality was in front of them, naturally no one dared to try again. They could only choose to obediently withdraw from the Heavenly Policy's secret realm and reluctantly give up this opportunity. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21-21. In the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, if one tried to refine a martial star by force, the final outcome would be death. There was no doubt about this, especially after the first failure. If one tried to refine a martial star by force a second time, it would almost certainly lead to death. In fact, every time the Heavenly Policy's secret realm opened, there would be Heavenly Policy Palace students who died. Many of these students were unwilling to give up and tried to refine a martial star a second time after failing the first time. After someone told everyone the results of the forced refinement, many of the Heavenly Policy Palace's elite students regained their rationality. This was especially true for those who had already failed. They no longer had the courage to try again. Although the Heavenly Policy's secret realm was precious, everyone could still tell which was more important when compared to their own lives. The students who had already failed chose to give up dejectedly, while those who had succeeded became even more cautious. At the same time, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao, who were the first to enter the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, had also successfully refined their first martial star. The two of them were more cautious, so the first martial star they chose was very small. Naturally, it wasn't difficult to refine it. After defeating the Mirage Beast in the Illusion Realm, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao had successfully refined their first martial star. Refining a martial star of this size wasn't too difficult for Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao. The Mirage Beast in the Illusion Realm was only at the comprehension state, so defeating it wasn't too difficult. Almost at the same time, the two of them slowly opened their eyes. They had successfully refined their first martial star. At this moment, Xiaochen could clearly feel that some indescribable changes had taken place in his body. It wasn't an increase in cultivation, nor was it a strengthening of his physical body. Instead, it was a deeper level of evolution. According to Xiaochen's guess, this was probably the improvement of his physique that Jun Wuya had mentioned. With the help of the martial star, Xiaochen's sword physique had been improved to a certain extent. However, because this was his first martial star, the improvement was not too great, and it was not enough for Xiaochen's sword physique to have a substantial breakthrough. However, after his first attempt, Xiaochen also personally experienced the magical effects of the martial star. It directly affected his physique. This was indeed an energy that Xiaochen had never encountered before. The Heavenly Book's secret realm indeed lives up to its reputation, Xiaochen said indifferently with a faint smile. After successfully refining the first martial star, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao continued to refine other martial stars. Furthermore, the size of the martial stars that they chose continued to increase. In fact, Given Xiao Chen and Xiao Zhao's strength, even if they were to face a Dao Realm Phantom Beast in the Dreamland, they would still be able to put up a fight. Therefore, the two of them could definitely choose a bigger martial star. Obviously, they would be able to improve more in this way. However, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had always been very cautious. Therefore, when they were choosing martial stars, they didn't choose a martial star that was too big. Instead, they chose to do it step by step. In the Heavenly Book Secret Realm, the flow of time was very blurry. After all, the surroundings were as dark as the starry sky and countless martial stars emitted a faint light. In such a space, time naturally became very blurry. It was unknown how long it had been since they entered the Heavenly Book Secret Realm. During this time, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had been doing their best to refine martial stars. Compared to the beginning, the martial stars that Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao had chosen were getting bigger and bigger. From the initial fist-sized martial stars to the current size had increased by several times. As the martial stars grew bigger and bigger, the phantom beasts that Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao encountered naturally became stronger and stronger. At this time, Xiao Chen was refining a martial star that was about 1 meter in size. In the fantasy realm, a phantom beast with an aura that was equivalent to the complete Dao realm appeared in front of Xiao Chen. This was the most powerful phantom beast that Xiao Chen had encountered after entering the Heavenly Book Secret Realm. Although it was in the fantasy realm, Xiao Chen still didn't dare to be careless. This was because Xiao Chen knew very well what the result of failure would be. The phantom beast let out a series of roars. Its huge body was like a mountain, giving people a strong sense of oppression. Standing in front of this phantom beast, Xiao Chen looked extremely small. However, even so, Xiao Chen didn't have the slightest bit of fear in his eyes. The corners of his mouth curved into a faint smile. Looking at the phantom beast in front of him, Xiao Chen muttered softly, "Complete Dao Realm?" After saying that, Xiao Chen's dustless sword instantly appeared in his hand with a thought. At the same time, he activated the sword realm and instantly enveloped the phantom beast. Being enveloped by Xiao Chen's sword realm, the phantom beast was instantly enraged. This was because the sharp sword chi was constantly attacking its huge body. It let out an earth-shattering roar and rushed toward Xiao Chen. Even with the suppression of the sword realm, the power that this phantom beast displayed at this time was already extremely frightening. Facing the phantom beast's attack, Xiao Chen's mind moved. Countless blood swords condensed around Xiao Chen's body and madly shot towards the phantom beast. After refining several martial stars, Xiao Chen's control of the sword body had become more proficient. Moreover, Xiao Chen could faintly feel that his sword body was about to have a breakthrough and receive a qualitative upgrade. Xiao Chen had already heard about the division of physiques from Jun Wuya. According to Jun Wuya, Xiao Chen's control of the sword body should be at the peak of the advanced level. However, the sword body at the peak of the advanced level had yet to unleash the true power of the sword body. There were still many aspects of the sword body's power that Xiao Chen needed to explore and master by himself. Countless blood swords madly shot towards the phantom beast. Facing the attack of the blood swords, although many wounds appeared on the phantom beast's body, it still had no intention of stopping. It continued to roar and madly charge towards Xiao Chen. Obviously, these blood swords alone were unable to defeat the phantom beast. Xiao Chen was also very clear about this. Xiao Chen's purpose of these blood swords was only to delay the phantom beast. A huge sword slowly took shape behind Xiao Chen as the countless blood swords continued to attack him. The most powerful attack that Xiao Chen had at his disposal was brought to bear right away. He shouted in a low voice, "Emperor's sword." Immediately, the huge sword fiercely charged towards the phantom beast. The size of the huge sword was almost the same as the phantom beast. Facing the attack of the huge sword, the phantom beast clenched its fists and fiercely punched out. Immediately, the two collided fiercely. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 21-22. The Emperor's sword was the most powerful killing move that Xiao Chen had mastered at the moment. The illusory beast, which was comparable to the great perfection of the Tao realm, was also extremely powerful. It was only one step away from having the strength of an end realm expert. Although it was an illusion, the collision between Xiaochen and the beast could still be described as terrifying. When the two powerful attacks collided, the entire illusion created by Wu Xing also showed signs of collapsing. The surrounding space began to distort, as if there was a black hole that was about to forcefully suck in everything in the illusion. The illusion was about to collapse. It was the first time Xiaochen had encountered such a situation. He had never encountered such a situation when he was fighting with the beast in the illusion. His expression changed slightly. However, before Xiaochen could react, a terrifying suction force enveloped Xiaochen. Then, without giving Xiaochen a chance to break free, Xiaochen was sucked away. At the same time, the huge phantasmal beast also disappeared without a trace at this moment. It was as if he had sunk into endless darkness. He couldn't even see his fingers and couldn't tell the direction at all. Facing such an outcome, Xiaochen was a little depressed. Failed? He thought that he had failed to refine the martial star. However, logically speaking, since he had failed, his soul should have been severely injured and his consciousness shouldn't continue to stay in the illusion. He wasn't sure what had happened. However, just as Xiaochen was guessing, Xiaochen suddenly felt as if something was about to awaken in the depths of his body. His consciousness was in endless darkness. In the outside world, Xiaochen's physical body was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. However, at this moment, around Xiaochen's physical body, terrifying sword qi kept gathering. These sword qi seemed to have materialized. It was visible to the naked eye, as if there were many transparent sharp swords circling around Xiaochen. The sudden change also startled Xiao Xiao. She glanced at Xiaochen, and a strange look flashed in her eyes as she asked, "You've made a breakthrough?" From Xiaochen's performance, Xiaochen's sword body seemed to have started to break through and transform. However, this transformation was something Xiaochen couldn't control. He couldn't help but pull away from Xiaochen. At this moment, it was indeed too dangerous to stay beside Xiaochen. If he wasn't careful, he would be attacked by the terrifying sword qi around Xiaochen. He didn't expect Xiaochen to break through so quickly. Regarding this, Xiao was naturally happy. With a breakthrough in sword body, Xiaochen's strength would definitely increase greatly. Just as Xiaochen's sword body started to break through, Xiaochen's cultivation was also increasing. Soon, he reached small success of the Tao realm. Xiaochen's body of the sword had made a breakthrough, and his cultivation had also begun to make breakthroughs. It was indeed a double blessing. Unfortunately, Xiaochen had no way to control all of this at the moment. His consciousness still couldn't control his body. As time passed, the sword qi around Xiaochen became more and more terrifying. At the same time, Xiaochen's cultivation also successfully broke through to small success of the Tao realm. After the breakthrough in cultivation, the sword body's power completely erupted. Terrifying sword qi roared and spread in all directions. Facing the terrifying sword qi that spread out from Xiaochen's body, Xiao Xiao could only use his spiritual energy to form a protective shield to resist. The terrifying sword qi spread out wildly. Such a huge commotion naturally attracted the attention of the elite students in the Heavenly Policy secret realm. Soon, some people rushed over. When they saw that the person who caused all this was actually Xiaochen, they couldn't help but exclaim, "It's the Sword Sect Master, Xiaochen, and that's the Moon Palace's holy maiden, Xiao Xiao." Soon, the crowd noticed Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao. However, they only glanced at Xiao Xiao before their eyes locked onto Xiaochen. This was because the aura that Xiaochen was emitting was extremely terrifying. It wasn't the power of cultivation, nor was it the power of the physical body. It was the power of the sword body, the power of the physique. At this moment, the sword body was like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins. The sword qi, which was already extremely terrifying, continued to grow stronger. Sensing the frightening sword qi that was continuously increasing in strength, someone soon realized that something was wrong. Then, he shouted loudly, "Retreat!" He signaled for everyone to retreat because the sword qi around Xiaochen could already cause harm to everyone. If they continued to maintain such a distance, it was very likely that they would be injured by the sword qi. Upon hearing someone shout, everyone quickly retreated until they maintained a safe distance. Then, they looked at Xiaochen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, in shock. Xiaochen didn't know that so many people were watching him as he floated in the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, a white light suddenly appeared in the darkness. Under the white light, Xiaochen's consciousness gradually gained control of his body. After his consciousness gradually gained control of his body, Xiaochen slowly opened his eyes. Along with this, the terrifying sword qi around Xiaochen also began to slowly dissipate. Xiaochen didn't know what had just happened, but after a simple feeling, he discovered that his cultivation had actually broken through. Moreover, the sword body seemed to have broken through as well. Xiaochen's eyes revealed a touch of excitement and doubt. He said somewhat uncertainly, "This." Upon hearing Xiaochen's murmur, Xiao stepped forward and said with a smile, "The sword body has broken through, and so has your cultivation." There was a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. Clearly, Xiao was very happy about Xiaochen's breakthrough. Upon hearing that his sword body had successfully broken through, and that not only that, but his cultivation had also broken through to the initial Dao realm, Xiaochen couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. He had broken through so quickly. Moreover, with the breakthrough of the sword body, Xiaochen's control and understanding of the sword body seemed to have reached a higher level. At the same time, some of the power of the sword body that he couldn't display before seemed to be able to be displayed with the breakthrough of the sword body. This made Xiaochen secretly excited. Xiaochen could be said to have personally experienced the power of the sword body. As a sword cultivator, Junwuya had also told Xiaochen that the ability to fully awaken the sword body was definitely more important to Xiaochen than anything else. The power of the physique should never be underestimated. Even Junwuya attached great importance to this point. Therefore, Xiaochen had always attached great importance to the cultivation of the sword body. Now that he had finally broken through as he wished, Xiaochen was naturally overjoyed. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21-23. Xiaochen was naturally overjoyed that his sword physique and cultivation had both broken through. With a faint smile on his face, Xiaochen looked at Xiao and said, "I didn't expect it to be so easy to break through." "Is it easy?" "If not for the fact that your sword physique had already reached the pinnacle of the great perfection realm, it would be a fool's dream to break through so smoothly," Xiao replied with a smile. A breakthrough in physique was indeed not a simple matter. The reason Xiaochen was able to complete the breakthrough so easily was entirely due to Xiaochen's previous accumulation. If not for Xiaochen's deep accumulation and the fact that his sword physique had already reached the pinnacle of the great perfection realm, Xiaochen would not have been able to break through so easily without these 2 points. However, no matter what, Xiaochen had finally completed the breakthrough. This was indeed a joyous matter. Xiaochen had successfully completed the breakthrough, but the two of them had no intention of leaving the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. The opportunity to enter the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm this time was extremely rare. Xiaochen and Xiao naturally wanted to refine as many martial stars as possible to increase their physique power. While Xiaochen had achieved a breakthrough in the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm, a major event had happened in the outside world. It was a major event regarding the Saber sect. It had been a month since Xiaochen and Xiao had entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm. When Xiaochen and Xiao had just entered the Heavenly Policy Secret Realm, news had spread from the Saber sect that Dao Xiong was preparing to step down as the sect master of the Saber sect and become the ancestor of the Saber sect, just like Junwuya. As for the sect master of the Saber sect, it would naturally be inherited by Dao Xiong's son, Dao Ju. When this news came out, the entire Great Thousand World was in an uproar. After all, the Saber sect was different from the Sword sect. Although the Sword sect was now in a decent position, it was still a far cry from its peak. However, the Saber sect was different. The Saber sect was still at its peak. Every action of such a large sect naturally attracted the attention of countless cultivators in the Great Thousand World. Furthermore, the sect master of the Saber sect had changed hands this time. Such a major event naturally caused a stir in the Great Thousand World. It could be said that the sect master of the Saber sect had changed hands this time without any warning. It was announced suddenly. Although Dao Ju was a monstrous talent in the Great Thousand World and had a great reputation, Dao Ju's age. Many people felt that it was too early for him to become the sect master of the Saber sect. Moreover, an emperor-level figure like Dao Xiong could be said to be at his peak now. Many people couldn't figure out why he had retreated behind the scenes at this time. Ancestor Dao, the ancestor was the sect's. Just like Jun Wuya, as the grand ancestor of the Sword's Gate, Jun Wuya would usually not care about the affairs of the Sword's Gate, and he had almost no real power in his hands. Only when the Sword's Gate was facing a real crisis of life and death would Jun Wuya, as the grand ancestor, intervene. Dao Xiong announced that he would step down from his position as the sect master and become the Saber sect's ancestor. His nature was no different from Jun Wuya's. The Saber sect's matter had shaken the Great Thousand World. A month had passed, and Dao Ju's succession ceremony was about to arrive. Almost all of the top powerhouses in the Great Thousand World had gathered in the Saber sect. Even Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, Li Xiao, and Li Chun, who were in the Heavenly Policy Mansion, had rushed to the Saber sect to participate in Dao Ju's succession ceremony. In the Saber sect, Jun Wuya, Long Yuan, Li Xiao, Luo Xing, Dan Qingyang, and a group of emperors were sitting together in Dao Xiong's cave. Everyone was drinking and chatting. At this time, Long Yuan would also look at Dao Xiong and ask, "Old man, why did you suddenly make such a decision? Weren't you worried about Dao Ju?" Long Yuan was not surprised that Dao Xiong would give up his position to Dao Ju. After all, Dao Xiong only had one son. Moreover, Dao Ju's talent and aptitude from a young age was indeed impressive. However, every time Dao Xiong mentioned Dao Ju, he looked as if he expected better from Dao Ju. Of course, this was mainly because of Dao Ju's personality. He would often say that if the Saber sect was handed over to Dao Ju in the future, he was really worried about what would happen to the Saber sect. However, Dao Xiong suddenly chose to retreat behind the scenes this time and gave the position of sect master to Dao Ju. This made Long Yuan very puzzled. Not only Long Yuan, but Dan Qingyang and the others were also puzzled. Dao Xiong smiled slightly when he heard this. He then drank the wine in his cup in one gulp and slowly said, "What if we can't be worried? What can we do even if we're worried? The times are changing, and we're all old men now. The current era should belong to the young. It's time for them to come to the front and create their own era. As for us old men, it's time for us to retreat behind the scenes." Long Yuan and the others fell silent when they heard Dao Xiong's words. To be honest, these old men had dominated the entire Great Thousand World for many years. All along, the Great Thousand World had developed under their rule. So many years had passed, and just like what Dao Xiong had said, the times had changed. Now, many outstanding prodigies had appeared out of nowhere, especially in the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Almost every one of them had a younger generation member who could look down on others. The speed of their growth also shocked everyone present. Perhaps this was the arrival of the new era. Dao Xiong saw this clearly and thus chose to give up his position to Dao Ju and hand over the Saber sect to him. Everyone was stunned when they heard Dao Xiong's words. Then, Dan Qingyang looked at Jun Wuya and smiled. "Looks like you've been influenced by the Sovereign Emperor." Indeed. Hearing this, Dao Xiong did not refute. He happily nodded and admitted it. Dao Xiong had indeed been influenced by Jun Wuya. Jun Wuya was the first person to see that the times were changing. Therefore, he did not take the power of the sword sect from Xiaochen. Instead, he chose to retreat behind the scenes and hide in the dark to protect Xiaochen and the sword sect. Dao Xiong was imitating Jun Wuya and handing the Saber sect to Dao Ju. He also retreated behind the scenes to protect Dao Ju and the Saber sect. Junwei chuckled when he heard Dan Qingyang and Dao Xiong's words. Every era has its own main character. It's time for us old men to give up our positions and let the young ones dominate our own era. You are right. Now that I think about it, an era like this should be very interesting. Hearing this, Dao Xiong laughed out loud. His tone was full of agreement. Chapter 21-24. The sovereigns all felt that the new era belonged to the younger generation like Dao Ju and Xiao Chen. Hearing the conversation between Dao Xiong and Junwei, Li Xiao, Luo Xing, and the other sovereigns all became pensive. They didn't know about the sovereigns. On the other side, inside Dao Ju's cave, Li Chun and a few other monstrous geniuses were gathered together, drinking and chatting. At this moment, a handsome young man raised his cup towards Dao Ju and smiled. Brother Dao Ju, congratulations. You have become a giant in such a short time and have taken over the Dao school. This is worthy of celebration. Hearing the young man's words, Dao Ju said somewhat mentally. Bullshit, I'm really not interested in being the sect master. It's so troublesome. With Dao Ju's personality, he definitely wasn't interested in being the sect master. This was because once he became the sect master, Dao Ju would no longer be able to act willfully. He would have to think and make decisions for the sake of the entire Saber School. This was obviously an extremely troublesome matter for Dao Ju. Thinking about it, being responsible for so many people in the Saber School, the burden on his shoulders was not light. If Dao Ju had a chance to choose, he definitely wouldn't take the sect master's position. Unfortunately, Dao Ju didn't have a choice. He didn't know what was wrong with the old man. After returning from the Wood Realm, the old man insisted on giving him the sect master's position. Dao Ju tried his best to refuse, but in the end, he still couldn't do anything. It was like being forced to do something beyond his ability. Therefore, Dao Ju wasn't excited or happy at all. Instead, he was filled with helplessness. Upon hearing Saber Ju's words, Li Chun, who was standing by the side, said faintly, given Saber Ju's character, it is indeed not a good thing to become the sect master. Li Chun's tone was very calm, as if he was stating a fact. However, Dao Ju said with some displeasure, listening to you is so boring. Right, where are Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao? Why aren't they here? Because Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were in the Heavenly Policy secret realm, they naturally couldn't come to Dao Ju's inauguration ceremony. Li Chun told Dao Ju the truth. Upon hearing Li Chun's words, Dao Ju drank a mouthful of wine helplessly and cursed under his breath. My old man is really sick in the head. He actually wants me to be the sect master. Sigh, Dao Ju was extremely unwilling in his heart, but there was nothing he could do about it. After all, he had no right to refute. Moreover, it was already impossible for Dao Ju to refuse at this time. He could only use the alcohol to vent the dissatisfaction in his heart, that was all. More and more powerful figures gathered in the Saber sect. 3 days later, it was finally time for Dao Ju's inauguration ceremony. Early in the morning, the entire Saber sect was bustling with noise and excitement. The main square was packed with people. A vice sect master of the Saber sect presided over the Dao Ju's inauguration ceremony. Everything was carried out strictly according to the procedures. Dao Ju also attended the ceremony in splendid attire. His entire temperament had undergone a huge change. Usually, Dao Ju gave off a frivolous vibe. But today, the smile on Dao Ju's face vanished completely. Instead, he gave off a dignified vibe and indeed gave off the vibe of an overlord. Facing such a Dao Ju, the vice sect masters of the Saber sect nodded in gratification. They didn't have the slightest objection to Dao Ju inheriting the position of sect master. This was because they had watched Dao Ju grow up. All these years, although Dao Ju was a little mischievous and jumpy, other than that, Dao Ju was definitely a qualified sect master and fully capable of leading a powerful sect like the Saber sect. Looking at Dao Ju in the sky, the vice sect masters of the Saber sect felt as though they were about to age. Time was like a torrent. No matter how strong one's cultivation was, one couldn't change time or turn back time. As time passed, the older generation of experts continued to age. As for the new generation of geniuses, they were like the rising sun, slowly rising. Looking at Dao Ju, then looking at Li Chun and the rest on the high platform, they might be the masters of the Great Thousand World in the future. The entire Great Thousand World, or even the entire world, would probably be their stage in the future. The ceremony proceeded very smoothly. In fact, no one would be foolish enough to cause trouble at this time. Furthermore, with the prestige of the Saber sect, there weren't many people in the entire Great Thousand World who would interfere and offend them. The inauguration ceremony ended very smoothly. Next, Dao Xiong appeared and announced that he was the ancestor of the Saber sect. The process of Dao Xiong becoming the ancestor of the Saber sect was very simple. Other than that, there wasn't anything special about it. After the inauguration ceremony ended successfully, everyone gathered together to drink and chat. Of course, the topic never left the day's matter, which was Dao Xiong and Dao Ju. The Saber sect welcomed a new sect master. Where would Dao Ju take the Saber sect? However, in general, with Dao Ju in charge, the Saber sect shouldn't have any major problems. Everyone was talking about Dao Xiong and Dao Ju. At the same time, Dao Ju, Dao Xiong, and the other sovereigns and geniuses sat together, drinking and chatting. These geniuses were basically the successors or juniors of the various sovereigns. Therefore, they were naturally qualified to sit and drink with the various sovereigns. Perhaps because of the grand occasion today, Dao Xiong was in a good mood. During the meal, he didn't forget to remind Dao Ju. "Kid, I'll leave the Saber sect to you. Whether you become a dragon or a worm depends on your own ability. Don't, you should do it yourself. I've already said that I'm not cut out for it." He originally wanted to remind Dao Ju, but who knew that Dao Ju didn't hesitate at all and directly spoke up. When he heard Dao Ju's words, Dao Xiong's face darkened. However, when he thought of the day today, he forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. He then looked at Dao Ju beside him. After putting on the sect master's uniform, Dao Ju indeed had a trace of the dignity of a sect master. Dao Xiong nodded his head in satisfaction. In Dao Xiong's heart, the only thing that worried him about his son was his character. In order to change Dao Ju's character, Dao Xiong had thought of countless methods. Unfortunately, they all ended in failure. However, when he saw Dao Ju today, Dao Xiong suddenly realized that there were some things that didn't necessarily have to be done according to one's own ideas. Dao Ju didn't necessarily have to become the person he wanted. Since he had become the sect master, Dao Ju definitely had the ability to use his own methods to continue the Saber sect's prosperity. Wasn't this the purpose of Dao Xiong's seclusion behind the scenes? Brothers, Happy New Year! In a new year, I hope all of you can have your wishes fulfilled. End of chapter. Chapter 21-25. Dao Xiong had always wanted to turn Dao Ju into a person like him. Therefore, Dao Xiong had always hated Dao Ju's personality, but at the same time, he was helpless. However, at this moment, perhaps because of the change in his state of mind, Dao Xiong suddenly thought things through. As his son, Dao Ju's personality was poles apart from his own. However, this did not mean that Dao Ju was inferior to him. If he handed the Saber sect to Dao Ju, he believed that Dao Ju would be able to use his own methods to make the Saber sect flourish. Thinking of this, Dao Xiong actually did not scold Dao Ju this time. Instead, he laughed heartily. "Ha, you little brat. Forget it. Since I've already handed it over to you, you can do whatever you want." It was unknown if it was because Dao Xiong had been relieved of his burden, but his mood had also become much more cheerful. Facing Dao Xiong in such a state, Dao Ju helplessly curled his lips and said, "Sigh, my life is tough." Humans were like this. Once the burden on their shoulders had been relieved, they would feel relaxed. Although Dao Xiong was still the patriarch of the Saber sect, the matters of the Saber sect would be handled by Dao Ju in the future. He basically did not need to care about these matters anymore. Everyone drank to their heart's content and only left the next morning. As for Jun Wuya, Luo Xing, Li Xiao, and the others, since Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were still in the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, they quickly made their way back. On the way back from the Saber sect, Li Xiao suddenly said to Jun Wuya and Luo Xing, "This time, I really understood something. Even I want to retire behind the scenes. You and Dao Xiong are right. With the arrival of a new era, us old fellows should give up our positions. We can't always occupy the outhouse and not take a shit." Perhaps because of Dao Xiong's influence, Li Xiao also had thoughts of retiring behind the scenes. After fighting for the Heavenly Policy Mansion for so many years, Li Xiao might still look young, but his heart was already full of vicissitudes. At this moment, he also wanted to unload this heavy burden on his body and properly enjoy life. Wandering the clouds, wild cranes, fine wine, delicious food, and a few old friends. This kind of life was indeed something that people yearn for. Hearing Li Xiao's words, Jun Wuya smiled and said, "That's easy. Just leave it to Li Chun. He's much more reliable than Dao Ju." Jun Wuya didn't object to Li Xiao's idea. Upon hearing this, Li Xiao was moved. Not only Li Xiao, but even Luo Xing felt the same way. Dao Xiong's choice this time had indeed made Luo Xing, Li Xiao, and the other sovereigns deeply moved. Especially in this era where the old and the new were replacing the old, it was time to give the stage to the younger generation. Li Xiao didn't make his stance clear, but it wasn't hard to see that he had already made up his mind. The group quickly returned to the Heavenly Policy Mansion. At this time, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were still cultivating in the Heavenly Policy secret realm. According to the time, every time the Heavenly Policy secret realm opened, it would last for about a year. During this year, as long as Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao didn't fail, they could stay in the Heavenly Policy secret realm until it closed. The two of them would then be forcibly sent out. They weren't in a hurry. To Jun Wuya, Li Xiao, and Luo Xing, a year was just the blink of an eye. Similarly, Jun Wuya and Luo Xing didn't need to worry about the Moon Palace and the Sword Sect. Some trivial matters would be handled by their subordinates. After staying in the Heavenly Policy Mansion for a month, Li Xiao finally announced to the public that he would resign from the position of Heavenly Policy Mansion Master and give it to Li Chun. As for himself, he would become the old ancestor of the Heavenly Policy Mansion, just like Jun Wuya and Dao Xiong. Li Xiao also made the same choice. When this news came out, many cultivators in the Great Thousand World couldn't remain calm. First, it was the Saber sect. Now, it was the Heavenly Policy Mansion. The various venerable sovereigns had all chosen to retire. Starting from Jun Wuya, there were now 3 venerable sovereigns who had retired behind the scenes. They no longer held great power and handed it all over to the younger generation of supreme talents. After Li Xiao announced that he would retire, many cultivators in the Great Thousand World began to realize that the Great Thousand World was about to undergo a great change. The older generation of venerable sovereigns had all chosen to retire behind the scenes. As for the younger generation of supreme talents, they would take over their mantle and wield great power. In that case, would the rules of the Great Thousand Domains still be maintained, or would the young geniuses come up with new rules? No one could say for sure. However, one thing was certain. This was the beginning of the replacement of the old with the new. It was also a sign that a new era had truly arrived. From now on, the Great Thousand World would belong to the younger generation. The rules that were set by the older generation of powerhouses might be broken or inherited by the younger generation. However, no matter what the outcome was, this would be a new era. Many cultivators had predicted the arrival of a new era. Regarding this, some were panicking, while others were looking forward to it. After all, a new era represented infinite possibilities, countless opportunities, and a new life. Following Li Xiao's announcement, the Heavenly Policy Mansion became lively. As the new sect master of the Saber sect, Dao Ju naturally came to congratulate Li Xiao personally. When he saw Li Chun, Dao Ju was still the same as before. He spoke without thinking. "Ah, Li Chun, now you're the same as me." In just 1 or 2 months, Dao Ju seemed to have matured a lot. However, his frivolous character still hadn't changed. Facing Li Chun, who was about to become the master of the Heavenly Policy Mansion, Dao Ju gloated. As for Li Chun, who had a Dao Ju character, he didn't care much when he heard what Dao Ju said. He only said indifferently, the replacement of the era is something that no one can stop. Compared to Dao Ju, Li Chun appeared to be very calm. Li Chun did not feel too much about becoming the Heavenly Policy Mansion's mansion master. According to Li Chun's indifferent nature, he felt that all of this was only natural. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to resist. He would just let nature take its course. Upon hearing Li Chun's words, Dao Ju curled his lips and said, "Tisk, you're still the same as before." Boring. When he was with Li Chun, Dao Ju would always feel a little bored by Li Chun's understatement. In Dao Ju's opinion, Li Chun was a little too dull. He was so dull that it was as if he didn't have any taste. Moreover, no matter what happened, Li Chun always showed a carefree expression. He was just like a living dead. Boring. In Dao Ju's opinion, such a person was really boring. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21-26. The Heavenly Policy Palace was very lively because of Li Chun's succession ceremony. Of course, this had no effect on Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao, as the two of them were still in the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, tirelessly refining and absorbing the energy of the martial stars. The Heavenly Policy Palace was very lively because of Li Chun's succession ceremony. Of course, this had no effect on Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao, as the two of them were still in the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, tirelessly refining and absorbing the energy of the martial stars. It was impossible to feel the flow of time in the Heavenly Policy's secret realm. Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao did not know how long it had been since they had entered the Heavenly Policy's secret realm. As usual, Xiao Chen had just finished refining a martial star and was about to continue refining. However, at that moment, the martial stars that were originally emitting a faint glow suddenly disappeared. The entire space turned dark. Xiao Chen was slightly taken aback by this. It was also at this moment that Xiao Xiao, who had also finished refining a martial star, said, "Looks like it's time." The time that Xiao Xiao mentioned was the time when the Heavenly Policy's secret realm would close. The disappearance of the martial stars also indicated that the Heavenly Policy's secret realm was about to close. Upon hearing this, Xiao Chen said somewhat disappointedly, "I still wanted to make a breakthrough. What a pity. Greedy. Do you think that constitution can be broken through so easily? The harvest this time is already great enough," Xiao Chen chided with a smile. Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao's harvest from this trip to the Heavenly Policy's secret realm was indeed great. First of all, their constitution had broken through from the Great Perfection realm to the Minor Perfection realm. Secondly, their cultivation had also broken through to the Minor Perfection realm. Such progress was already very good. Upon hearing Xiao Xiao's words, Xiao Chen nodded helplessly. He naturally knew this, but who wouldn't want to become stronger? Of course, this was just a thought. After all, breaking through wasn't something that could be achieved just by thinking about it. The Heavenly Policy's secret realm was about to close, and many martial stars had disappeared without a trace. In the following time, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao waited patiently for the Heavenly Policy's secret realm to close. They did not have to wait for long before an unknown force enveloped Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao. After that, the two of them were successfully sent out of the Heavenly Policy's secret realm. After returning to the Heavenly Policy Mansion and leaving the Heavenly Policy's secret realm, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao felt a gaze that they had not felt for a long time. At the same time, they also saw Li Chun, who had specially come to pick them up. Facing Li Chun, Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao still did not know about the changes in the Great Thousand Realms. They also did not know that Li Chun was now the Heavenly Policy Palace's palace master. He casually greeted Li Chun. Seeing this, Li Chun smiled and calmly said, "Looks like all of you have gained quite a lot. Not bad, I guess, Xiaochen replied with a smile upon hearing this. The three of them casually chatted for a while before they arrived at Jun Wuya and Luo Xing's residence. When they saw Jun Wuya and Luo Xing, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao bowed respectfully. Then, everyone sat together and talked about the things that had happened in the Great Thousand Realms over the past year. When they found out that Dao Ju and Li Chun had become the palace masters of the Saber sect and the Heavenly Policy Mansion, respectively, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao were surprised. They did not expect Dao Xiong and Li Xiao to give up their positions. They looked at Li Chun in surprise. Facing Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao's gazes, Li Chun said calmly, "Dao Ju and I are nothing." However, the Great Thousand Realms has indeed changed greatly over the past year. It is almost unrecognizable.
Oh?
Tell me about it. Upon hearing this, Xiaochen asked with great interest. Knowing Li Chun's character, he would definitely not exaggerate. In this case, since he had said so, the great wide world had probably changed a lot in the past year. In the face of Xiaochen's question, Li Chun did not hide anything and said calmly, "To put it simply, it is the change of era. In a year, except for the Dragon Palace, almost all the palace masters of the major forces have been replaced by the younger generation." According to Li Chun, from the beginning, when Dao Xiong and Li Xiao abdicated, the Great Thousand Realms seemed to have set off a storm. Many experts of the older generation chose to retreat behind the scenes and became ancestor-level figures. The power of the sects was also handed over to a group of young geniuses. Dan Valley, Weapons Sect, Talisman Sect, Hetian Sect, Mutian Mountain, Shrines, Black Emperor Sect, Taiching Temple, and many other forces, regardless of whether they were strong or weak, were like this. It was no exaggeration to say that the Great Thousand Realms was now controlled by the younger generation. Not to mention the other forces, just the 10 great Lingtian sects, only the Dragon Palace and the Moon Palace had not changed their palace masters. Needless to say, the Moon Palace was definitely because of Xiao Xiao. After all, Xiao Xiao was in the Heavenly Strategy's secret realm. Even if Luo Xing wanted to abdicate, he could only wait until Xiao Xiao left the Heavenly Strategy's secret realm. However, at this time, Xiao Xiao and Xiaochen had already returned from the Heavenly Strategy's secret realm. It would not be long before Xiao Xiao succeeded as the palace master of the Moon Palace. As for the Dragon Palace, it was because Long Qing did not have such prestige for the time being. Therefore, even if Long Yuan wanted to abdicate, it was not possible for the time being. However, according to various signs, Long Yuan had already begun to let Long Qing intervene in the affairs of the Dragon Palace. Obviously, he intended to cultivate Long Qing to be the next palace master of the Dragon Palace. In just a short year, the Great Thousand World had indeed changed a lot, so much so that it was a little ridiculous. The older generation of powerhouses had retired one after another, allowing the Great Thousand World to completely enter a new era. Compared to the past, the people who were truly in charge of the various major sects in the Great Thousand World had changed from the older generation to the younger generation of supreme talents. This was the change of the era. Upon hearing Li Chun's words, Xiaochen and Xiao Xiao were slightly stunned. The two of them did not expect that in just a short year, the Great Thousand World would have changed so much. The change of an era seemed to have been completely completed in just a year. The current Great Thousand World had become the world of the younger generation, and the younger generation would set new rules. After exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Xiaochen poured a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. The change of the old and new eras? It seems that the Great Thousand World will be even more exciting in the future. Xiaochen could already foresee that after this change of the old and new eras, the Great Thousand World would be even more exciting and turbulent in the future. This was because with the rise of the younger generation, many of the rules and regulations left by the older generation would probably be broken. In order to break these rules and set new rules, the first thing to do was to destroy everything formed by the previous era, and then reconstruct a set of rules that belonged to the new era, which belonged to the younger generation. Fighting and chaos would probably soon become the main colors of the Great Thousand World. After all, the younger generation was a generation full of vigor, and they were unwilling to be mediocre. The Great Thousand World, which had maintained peace for many years, was probably going to usher in a great change and turmoil. Please collect, vote, recommend. The error-free chapters of Swordmaster Vast Expanse will continue to be updated in the hand fighting bar. There are no advertisements in the website. Please collect and recommend the hand fighting bar. If you like Swordmaster Vast Expanse, please collect Swordmaster Vast Expanse. Chapter 21-27. In just a year, the situation in the Great Thousand World had completely changed. The powerhouses of the older generation had all chosen to retreat behind the scenes and give the stage to the younger generation. In just a year, the situation in the Great Thousand World had completely changed. The powerhouses of the older generation had all chosen to retreat behind the scenes and give the stage to the younger generation. One could almost predict that the Great Thousand World would be very exciting and chaotic in the following period of time. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's sigh, Li Chun said indifferently, "However, Xiao Chen, you're under the greatest pressure now. After all, the Sword Sect has yet to be ranked as one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects." Li Chun was very direct. The Sword Sect was indeed not one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Therefore, if Xiao Chen wanted to reach the peak, he first had to let the Sword Sect return to the 10 great Ling Tian sects. This was not an easy task. Even though the Sword Sect already had Jun Wuya, the overall strength of the Sword Sect was still incomparable to any of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Upon hearing Li Chun's words, Xiao Chen did not refute because this was the truth. The great changes in the Great Thousand World could not be stopped by a single person. This was the inevitable result of the current of time. Therefore, after hearing Li Chun's words, although Xiao Chen and Xiao Xiao were shocked, they quickly accepted it. A few days later, Xiao Chen and the rest stayed in the Heavenly Policy Mansion for another 2 days. Then, Xiao Chen and Jun Wuya returned to the Sword Sect, while Xiao Xiao returned to the Moon Palace with Luo Xing. Previously, they had already heard from Luo Xing that she intended to pass the position of Palace Master to Xiao Xiao and would probably announce it to the public soon. Xiao Chen naturally could not intervene in the matters of the Moon Palace. Moreover, it had been a long time since he left the Sword Sect, so there were probably many matters in the Sword Sect waiting for Xiao Chen to deal with. Together with Jun Wuya, they safely returned to the Sword Sect. Just as Xiao Chen and Jun Wuya arrived at the Sword Sect, Sang Xing, Zhou Song, Wu Wan, Nangong Guan, and the rest came forward to greet them. They first bowed respectfully to Jun Wuya and said, "Ancestor, Master." He then looked at Xiao Chen and said, "Greetings, sect leader." Facing the crowd, Jun Wuya only nodded his head indifferently. He did not say anything, nor did he stay for long. He immediately left. Just as Jun Wuya had said at the start, he would not bother about the small matters of the Sword Sect. As such, he had no intention of interfering. Knowing Jun Wuya's personality, only after Jun Wuya left did Xiao Chen and the others come to the main hall of the Sword Sect. Here, Xiao Chen saw Yang Song and the others who he had not seen in a long time. Before, Xiao Chen sent Yang Song and the others to the Dan Valley to find a chance to break through to the End Realm. Now, many years had passed and Yang Song had successfully broken through to become an End Realm expert. Seeing Yang Song successfully break through and return, Xiao Chen was naturally delighted. However, very quickly, Xiao Chen also received bad news from Yang Song. Out of the people who went to the Dan Valley to cultivate with Yang Song, only Yang Song had successfully broken through to the End Realm. The others were unable to break through. This was indeed a fly in the ointment. After all, in order for the Dan Valley to provide a cultivation secret realm, Xiao Chen had paid a heavy price. However, in the end, only Yang Song had successfully broken through. Seeing Xiao Chen's disappointed expression, Sang Xing consoled him. "Sect leader, there is nothing we can do about it. After all, breaking through to the End Realm is extremely difficult. For Yang Song to be able to break through is already a huge fortune. I know that, but it's human nature to be greedy, isn't it?" Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled in a carefree manner and quickly adjusted his mood. At the start, When he heard that only Yang Song had broken through to the End Realm, Xiaochen couldn't help but be disappointed. However, thinking about it, as Tsang Xing had said, for one person to break through to the End Realm was already a huge fortune. After all, breaking through to the End Realm wasn't a simple matter. On the contrary, it was extremely difficult. After adjusting his mood, Xiaochen looked towards Yang Song and smiled. Yang Song Sr. being able to break through is already a huge fortune. Since Senior Yang Song has broken through to the End Realm, then our sword sect's strength has increased by another level. One more End Realm expert, even if he had just broken through, was extremely helpful to the overall strength of the sword sect. Yang Song had successfully broken through to the End Realm. With that, his identity naturally rose from sword head to deputy sect leader. Yang Song's promotion to deputy sect leader naturally delighted the entire sword sect. That night, Yang Song also held a banquet and invited everyone in the sword sect to celebrate. Xiaochen also joined the banquet. During the banquet, Xiaochen, Tsang Xing, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and Wu Wan talked about the changes in the world in the past year. With regards to the changes over the past year, Tsang Xing and the other three sighed from the bottom of their hearts. The current Great Thousand World has completely changed. With the younger generation in charge, it's really hard to say what the situation will be like in the future. That's right. After all, with the younger generation in charge, everyone has different personalities and ambitions. Who knows what the world will be like in the future? Nandongguan said. The four of them sighed. However, very quickly, Zhou Song said with a gloomy expression, "Sect leader, the heavenly sect has been a little strange recently. They have already sent 3 to 4 batches of spies to the Sword Province. Although we have been sending people to clear them out, the heavenly sect has no intention of giving up." The heavenly sect had been sending spies to the Sword Province. Xiaochen didn't believe that they were here to play. According to what Zhou Song said, they had already sent 3 to 4 batches of spies. Many of them had already been killed by the sword sect. However, the heavenly sect still didn't plan on stopping. Hearing Zhou Song's words, a cold intent flashed in Xiaochen's eyes. However, very quickly, he laughed coldly. Is Yangchen trying to use my sword sect to show off his might? He just became the sect leader of the heavenly sect, and he is already planning to act against my sword sect? Yangchen was the new sect leader of the heavenly sect. He was also Tao Ming's disciple and a genius in the Great Thousand World. Previously, Xiaochen had heard about Yangchen from Li Chan. He knew that Tao Ming had passed the position of sect leader of the heavenly sect to Yangchen. Although he had never had any interaction with Yangchen, Xiaochen instinctively didn't have any good impression of Yangchen because of his relationship with the heavenly sect. Moreover, judging from Yangchen's actions after he became the sect leader of the heavenly sect, he was obviously the kind of person who didn't want to be left out. He had just taken over the heavenly sect, and he couldn't wait to test the sword sect. Was he trying to complete what Tao Ming had failed to do? With a sneer, Xiaochen said indifferently, "Then kill them. Kill all the spies of the heavenly sect. I want to see how many people Yangchen can send to the Sword Province. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 21-28. Although Xiaochen didn't know what Yangchen wanted to do for the time being, no matter what Yangchen's intentions were, Xiaochen couldn't let him succeed. Killing the spies of the heavenly sect who had secretly infiltrated the Sword Province was the first step. Since Yangchen kept sending spies into the Sword Province, Xiaochen would kill them until Yangchen had no more spies to send. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Tsang Xing and the others nodded respectfully. After being the sect leader for so many years, Xiaochen's prestige in the sword sect had been completely established. Even the deputy sect leaders like Tsang Xing didn't dare to disobey Xiaochen's orders in the slightest. After giving the order to kill the spies of the heavenly sect, Xiaochen paused for a moment before continuing. In addition, send people to Tianzhou to find out what Yangchen wants to do, as well as the current situation of the heavenly sect. Killing the spies of the heavenly sect was only the first step. Xiaochen knew that from now on, he would probably have a new opponent. From the series of actions Yang Chen had taken after taking over as the sect leader of the Heavenly Sect, Yang Chen was obviously hostile to the Sword Sect. Although he didn't know what kind of person Yang Chen was, based on the current situation, he and Yang Chen were destined to be enemies because of the relationship between the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect. Yang Chen's actions against the Sword Sect were actually a microcosm of the transition between the old and the new. Because Yang Chen had become the sect leader of the Heavenly Sect, the relationship between the Heavenly Sect and the Sword Sect would probably change. From the current situation, this change would obviously make the already tense relationship between the two sects even more hostile. After Xiao Chen's 2 orders were given, Sang Xing, Zhou Song, Nangong Guan, and the others naturally carried them out. Xiao Chen didn't stay long at the banquet. After all, many people were nervous with Xiao Chen here. Therefore, Xiao Chen only exchanged a few words with Sang Xing and the others. After explaining some matters regarding the Heavenly Sect, Xiao Chen stood up and left. Xiao Chen hurriedly returned to his cave residence. It had been a long time since he last saw Qin Shuru and the other girls. He missed them very much. While Xiao Chen was returning to the Sword Gate, on the other side, in Yang Chen's cave abode in the Heavenly Gate of the Tianzhou, 2 elders of the Heavenly Gate were standing respectfully in front of Yang Chen, who was sitting on the main seat. He was wearing a gray robe and his figure was a little thin. His appearance couldn't be considered handsome, but he gave off a calm and wise feeling. However, his eyes seemed a little hazy, which made people feel a little uncomfortable when they looked at him. This was the first impression Yang Chen gave people. Sitting on the main seat, Yang Chen looked at the 2 elders and asked softly, "Xiao Chen has returned from the Heavenly Policy Hall?" "That's right. He just returned to the Sword Sect today," one of the elders nodded and replied truthfully. Xiao Chen's return to the Sword Sect was immediately reported to the Heavenly Sect, and Yang Chen found out. Hearing that Xiao Chen had returned to the Sword Sect, a cold light flashed through Yang Chen's eyes. At the same time, the battle intent in his heart slowly rose. As the new sect master of the Heavenly Sect, Yang Chen's greatest dream was to destroy the Sword Sect and accomplish what his master, Tao Ming, failed to do. As a result, Yang Chen had always viewed Xiao Chen as his opponent. Now, the person he had always viewed as his opponent had finally returned. Unable to hide the battle intent in his heart, Yang Chen sneered, "Xiao Chen, I won't be like my master. This time, I will destroy the Sword Sect completely." With that, Yang Chen looked at the 2 elders and said calmly, "It's time to take action. Remember, it has to be fast and leave no one alive." "Yes." Hearing this, the 2 elders respectfully nodded in acknowledgement. They had no idea what Yang Chen was talking about, but it was clearly targeted at the Sword Sect. In the world of great battles, Xiao Chen had met his first opponent, and that was Yang Chen. As the new sect master of the Heavenly Sect, Yang Chen had his own grand ambitions. He wanted to bring the Heavenly Sect to greater heights. To do that, he first had to deal with the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect could be said to be the Heavenly Sect in Tao Ming. It had always been like a thorn in his throat, and Yang Chen wanted to be the one to pull it out. After receiving the order, the 2 elders quickly left and began to carry out Yang Chen's orders in secret. The Heavenly Sect continued to move, while the Sword Sect also reacted as soon as Xiao Chen returned. Within the Jian province, numerous disciples of the Sword Sect were dispatched. They scattered throughout the Jian province and began to hunt down the spies sent by the Heavenly Sect. In almost every city in the Jian province, there was a massacre every day. The 2 sides of the massacre were the disciples of the Sword Sect and the spies of the Heavenly Sect. Perhaps the shopkeeper of an inconspicuous shop looked no different, but he was actually a spy of the Heavenly Sect. Once discovered, the disciples of the Sword Sect would mercilessly kill him. Sect Master Xiao Chen had personally given the order to kill the spies of the Heavenly Sect. The disciples of the Sword Sect naturally did not dare to slack off. Moreover, everyone in the Sword Sect hated the Heavenly Sect to the core. The enmity between the 2 sects had long been impossible to resolve, so once they encountered each other, there would definitely be a great battle. Yi City was a large city within the Jian province. At this moment, several higher-ups of the Yi family, the #1 clan in Yi City, had gathered together. One of them looked at the patriarch of the Yi family, who sat on the main seat. Patriarch, Yi City is in complete chaos. In just 3 days, the Sword Sect has killed over 1,000 people, causing everyone in the city to panic. Should we step in and stop them? The Yi family was the overlord of Yi City. They were also a subordinate force that had always followed the Sword Sect. They could be said to be loyal to the Sword Sect, so Xiao Chen treated the Yi family well. He directly made the Yi family an overlord in Yi City. Due to the Sword Sect's massacre of the spies of the Heavenly Sect, Yi City was indeed in chaos. However, the patriarch of the Yi family refused without hesitation. Nonsense. The order to kill the spies of the Heavenly Sect was personally given by the sect master. What does it mean for our Yi family to step in and stop them? Do you want me to go against the sect master's wishes? How could the Yi family stop an order personally given by Xiao Chen? Not only could they not stop it, but they also had to cooperate unconditionally. All this while, there were many orders from Sword's Gate, some were from the vice headmaster, some were from the sword head, and some were from the sword head. With regards to these orders, the Yi family could send a message to Sword's Gate to explain the reasons behind them and mediate between the two parties. However, the Yi family clearly could not object to an order personally given by Xiao Chen. Moreover, this matter was related to the Heavenly Sect. If the Yi family dared to speak carelessly at this moment, they would definitely be courting death. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 21-29. In the face of an order personally issued by Xiao Chen, the Yi clan naturally did not dare to have the slightest objection. After being reprimanded by the head of the Yi clan, the senior member of the Yi clan also shut his mouth and did not dare to say anything more. However, when no one was paying attention, a cold glint flashed across the eyes of the Yi clan member. Unfortunately, no one present and the people of the Yi clan noticed it. As for the matter of Yi City, there wasn't much to worry about. The so-called panic was a little exaggerated. After all, the disciples of the Sword Sect had never made life difficult for the commoners. They had always been targeting the spies of the Hetian sect. Therefore, the situation in Yi City was quite stable. The Yi family naturally did their best to cooperate with the disciples of the Sword Sect to capture the spies of the Hetian sect. However, when night fell, a black-clothed man silently left the Yi family residence, quickly disappearing into the night. This black-clothed man left the Yi family residence, so it was obvious that he was a member of the Yi family. Moreover, looking at his comprehension realm cultivation, his status in the Yi family shouldn't be low. At the very least, he should be an elder. No one noticed the tracks of this black-clothed man. Very quickly, in a residence in the northeast corner of Yi City, this black-clothed man pushed open the door and entered. Using the weak light in the room, this person was the elder who had persuaded the Yi family head to stop the Sword Sect. His name was Yi Xian, and he could be considered an important person in the Yi family. However, for Yi Xian to sneak here in the middle of the night, no one expected that when Yi Xian arrived, several black-clothed men would appear in the originally empty room. Moreover, their cultivation had all reached the End Realm. A total of 5 End Realm experts descended in Yi City, and these 5 people definitely weren't from the Sword Sect. With so many End Realm experts appearing here, it was enough to show that things weren't simple. Facing the 5 people in front of him, Yi Xian respectfully cupped his hands and bowed. Hetian sect disciple greets elder. Yi Xian actually claimed to be a disciple of the Heavenly Gate. Hearing this, one of the 5 people faintly nodded and said, "How are the arrangements?" "Elder, don't worry, everything has been arranged. However, there will be some trouble with the Sword Sect." Hearing this, Yi Xian respectfully replied. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the Heavenly Sect elder didn't seem to care too much and said, "It's fine, we just need to delay for a cup of tea's time." They needed to be on guard against the Sword Sect, but these 5 elders didn't seem to care too much. He still didn't know what the Coiling Heaven sect's plan was, but from all the signs, their target shouldn't be the Sword Sect, because from start to finish, the Coiling Heavens sect didn't seem to have any intention of targeting the Sword Sect. Yang Chen's target wasn't the Sword Sect, and he didn't want to start a war with the Sword Sect. So, what was Yang Chen's goal? For the time being, they didn't receive any accurate information, but at this moment, the Coiling Heavens sect had already begun their operation. After instructing Exin for some time, the 5 Heavenly Combining Gate Elders ordered Exin to leave. After Exin left, the 5 of them looked at each other before opening their mouths one after another. It's about time, let's do it. Prepare to attack. East City had already become extremely quiet at night. Not many people could be seen on the streets. At this moment, 5 black figures appeared in the sky above the He clan's courtyard. A moment later, a frightening aftershock was suddenly emitted from the sky above the He clan's mansion. At the same time, more than half of the He clan's mansion was destroyed in an instant. Someone was attacking the He family residence, and the person who attacked wasn't weak. He was extremely strong. Being attacked, the He family reacted right away. Under the lead of the He family head, a group of He family experts appeared and arrived in front of the 5 black-clothed men. The He family head had a Tao realm cultivation, but when he faced the 5 black-clothed men, his expression was extremely solemn. End realm. End realm experts. The 5 black-clothed men that appeared in front of him were all end realm experts. 5 black-clothed men appearing in the He family was definitely a calamity. Moreover, the He family head still didn't know the identities of the 5 of them. Facing 5 end realm experts, the He family didn't have any ability to fight back. As such, the He family head could only stall for time. Seniors, what is the meaning of this? How did my He family offend you? Don't waste your time, the He family will be destroyed today. The Sword Sect won't be able to save you. One of the Coiling Heavens sect elders saw through the He family head's intentions and said. The 5 of them were the 5 Coiling Heavens sect elders that Exin met before. At this moment, they suddenly attacked the He family, which was completely out of the Sword Sect's expectations. The expression of the head of the He clan became increasingly ugly when his thoughts were seen through with a glance. However, this time around, the head of the He clan did not have the opportunity to speak. The 5 elders of the Heavenly Gate immediately attacked again and began to destroy the He clan. Moreover, during the process, what the He family members didn't expect was that Exin, who was an elder of the He family, would suddenly turn against them and kill his own family members. Exin, you're crazy. Sensing Exin's actions, several elders of the He family shouted in anger. Hearing their angry shouts, Exin coldly smiled and replied, I'm not crazy. I'm a member of the Coiling Heavens sect. The sect leader has orders, so I'm just following orders. Exin was a member of the Coiling Heavens sect. Hearing this, everyone in the He family felt as if thunder had exploded in their heads. As one of the elders of the He family, Exin was actually a spy of the He family. What was laughable was that during the investigation of the Sword Sect, everyone in the He family swore that everyone in the He family was loyal to the Sword Sect. Looking at it now, it was simply a joke. Even the elders of the family had joined the Coiling Heavens sect, yet the He family dared to say that they didn't have a single spy of the Coiling Heavens sect. They didn't expect that there would be a traitor in the family, and one who held a high position. This made everyone in the He family furious, but there was nothing they could do. Looking at their family members being killed one by one, as well as the unstoppable aura of the 5 Coiling Heavens sect elders, the He family members were filled with despair. It was impossible to block the attacks of 5 End Realm experts. However, when the battle erupted, the disciples of the Sword Sect who were in East City rushed over. Unfortunately, the strongest among them was only a Comprehension Realm Elder. With such strength, he wasn't a match for the 5 Coiling Heavens sect elders. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2130. Facing the disciples of the Sword Sect, one of the 5 elders of the Heavenly Sect sneered. Reckless fools. Immediately after, he directly attacked the disciples of the sword sect. Facing the disciples of the sword sect, one of the 5 elders of the heavenly sect sneered. "Reckless fools." Immediately after, he directly attacked the disciples of the sword sect. They never expected that 5 elders of the heavenly sect would appear in each city. As a result, each city's strength alone was unable to withstand them. The battle started suddenly and ended quickly as well. The He clan did not have the slightest ability to resist and was directly annihilated. The disciples of the Sword's Gate were also all killed. In less than a quarter of an hour, the He clan was annihilated, and the 5 elders of the Coiling Heaven sect quickly disappeared into the night. However, before they left, the 5 of them left behind a sentence on the broken walls of the He clan's mansion. "This is only the beginning." Such threatening words were indeed infuriating. The incident in each city quickly spread to the Sword sect. In the Sword sect, Song Xing, who was cultivating, was suddenly awakened by a knock on the door. An elder of the Sword sect hurriedly ran in and reported. "Vice sect master, bad news. Something happened in each city." The elder did not dare to delay the matter in each city and immediately reported it to Song Xing. When he heard that 5 elders of the heavenly sect had appeared in each city, Song Xing's face instantly darkened. Although the location of each city could not be said to be the central region of the Sword Province, it was also not the border region. However, even so, it was actually infiltrated by the 5 heavenly coiling school's elders. Song Xing was infuriated by such an incident. Moreover, Song Xing did not expect that the He clan would be directly destroyed. Song Xing knew about the He clan in each city. After all, this was a large clan that had always followed the Sword sect. It could be said that they were loyal and devoted to the Sword sect. Now that they were destroyed, it was undoubtedly a slap to the face of the Sword sect. Without wasting any time, Song Xing quickly contacted Nangong Guan, Lin Qing, and Li Ku after hearing about what had happened in each city. The 4 of them quickly rushed to each city through the teleportation array. 2 hours later, Song Xing and the other 3 arrived. However, the 5 elders of the Heavenly Gate had already disappeared without a trace, not leaving behind a single trace. Standing in the sky with gloomy expressions, Song Xing and the other 3 looked at the scene in front of them. The He clan was in ruins, and the words left behind by the Heavenly sect made their expressions extremely ugly. Xiaochen had just given the order to kill the spies of the Heavenly sect, but the Heavenly sect had directly destroyed the He clan. This was clearly a slap to the face of the Sword sect. After a moment of silence, Nangongguan finally said in a deep voice, "Is the new sect master of the Heavenly sect trying to intimidate us?" The Heavenly sect's target was not the Sword sect, but the He clan that was loyal to the Sword sect. They were one of the Sword sect's subordinate forces. Although their actions could not directly cause the Sword sect great losses, it would undoubtedly cause the Sword sect to lose face. Thinking about it, as a subordinate force of the Sword sect, they were directly destroyed by the Heavenly sect. Wasn't this embarrassing for the Sword sect? If they couldn't even protect their own subordinate forces, what would the other subordinate forces of the Sword sect think if this kind of thing happened a few more times? Every year, they would hand over a large amount of cultivation resources to the Sword sect, but in the end, they did not receive the protection of the Sword sect. This would indeed cause them to be bitterly disappointed, and at the same time, they would become a joke to the other forces. Following Nangongguan's words, Song Xing said with a cold expression, "I'll report this matter to the sect master first." Now that the matter had happened, they could only wait and see how Xiaochen would deal with it. From the Heavenly sect's actions, Yang Chen had indeed taken Xiaochen down a notch. At the same time, he had thoroughly expressed his hostility towards the Sword sect. Song Xing's group of 4 continued to stay in each city to investigate. As for Xiaochen, who was in the Sword sect, he quickly received a message from Song Xing and learned of what had happened in each city. It had only been a few days since he returned to the Sword sect, and this kind of thing had happened. Moreover, it was not too early or too late. Yang Chen had chosen to make his move after he returned to the Sword sect. He had waited until he returned to the Sword sect before making his move. This was clearly aimed at him. Moreover, from the series of events that had happened before, it was clear that Yang Chen had been preparing for this for a long time. Sitting upright in the clouds, Xiao Chen's eyes flashed with a cold light. Qin Shiru and the other women beside him asked worriedly, "Husband, are you all right?" The women also knew what had happened in the city, so they had been accompanying Xiao Chen. When he heard their questions, Xiao Chen shook his head slightly and said, "I'm fine." The incident in Yi City had indeed made Xiao Chen a little angry. However, this alone was not enough to do anything to the sword sect. It was nothing more than making him feel disgusted or sending him a letter of challenge. Indeed, the heavenly sect's actions could be seen as a letter of challenge from Yang Chen to Xiao Chen. However, this letter of challenge was a little too much. At the same time, what Xiao Chen did not have time to react was that the incident in Yi City was only the beginning. Not long after Xiao Chen received the letter from Sangxing, the other 3 cities near the border of the Sword Province were also attacked by the heavenly sect. The clans and forces in the cities that were affiliated with the Sword sect were directly annihilated. News of the attacks continued to reach Xiao Chen. At this point in time, 5 cities in the Sword Province had been attacked by the heavenly sect. The heavenly sect's target was very clear. They were targeting the forces affiliated with the Sword sect. They acted quickly and decisively. Moreover, they came and went without a trace. Obviously, the heavenly sect had even planned their escape route before they attacked. Therefore, when the experts from the Sword sect arrived, the heavenly sect had already disappeared without a trace. In just one night, 5 cities were ambushed, and 6 of Sword's Gate's subordinate forces were annihilated. Xiao Chen was enraged by the events that had unfolded before his very eyes. The heavenly sect's actions, or rather Yang Chen's actions, did not have much effect on the Sword sect. However, the region was very disgusting. Moreover, the heavenly sect would leave behind some provocative words for the forces affiliated with the Sword sect. This was obviously a provocation to Xiao Chen. After a night of silence, in the end, 5 cities in the Sword Province were attacked and 6 forces affiliated with the Sword sect were annihilated by the heavenly sect. Sitting in the courtyard with Qin Shiru and the other girls by his side, Xiao Chen's eyes were extremely cold. He looked in the direction of the heavenly sect and gradually revealed a cold smile. "Yang Chen, since you want to play, I'll play with you." Xiao Chen had already received Yang Chen's letter of challenge. The next step was to see how Xiao Chen would respond. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2131. In just one night, 5 cities in the Sword Province were attacked by the Kadian sect and 6 of the Sword sect's subordinate forces were annihilated. Among them, the Yi family was the most infuriating. After all, the Yi family was one of the earliest subordinate forces to follow the Sword sect. After a night of dealing with the situation, Sangxing and the others returned to the Sword sect one after another. However, the Sword sect sent out several powerful experts to investigate the Kadian sect's whereabouts in various places in the Sword Province. However, Xiao Chen did not have much hope for this. Judging from the situation last night, the attack this time was obviously prepared by the Kadian sect. Now, the people of the Kadian sect had probably already left the Sword Province. In the main hall of the Sword sect, Xiao Chen, Sangxing, and the other deputy sect leaders gathered. After last night's incident, everyone's expression was incomparably cold and they were furious. Because the Kadian sect's actions were undoubtedly a blatant provocation. They didn't attack the Sword sect directly, but attacked the subordinate forces instead. If this wasn't a provocation, then what was it? The Sword sect definitely had to respond to such a provocation. However, it was up to Xiao Chen to decide how to retaliate. After all, Xiao Chen was the sect leader of the Sword sect. Sangxing and the others shifted their gazes to Xiao Chen. Facing their gazes, Xiao Chen revealed a faint smile and said, "Since they have issued a challenge, we naturally have to respond." In the face of the Kadian sect's provocation, the Sword sect definitely couldn't choose to remain silent. If not, wouldn't they become a laughing stock in the Great Thousand World? they definitely had to respond. But at this point, Xiaochen paused, swept a glance at everyone present, and continued. Since Yangchen wants to play with me, my sword sect will naturally accompany him to the end. Xiaochen had already decided to counterattack. On the other side, within the heavenly gate of the Tianzhou, Yangchen had also received the report of last night's operation. Everything went smoothly, according to the plan, and there were no mistakes. Listening to the elder's report, Yang Chen's lips curled into a faint smile. He then looked at the sky, in the direction of Sword's Gate, and softly murmured, "Let's go, Sword's Gate." "Alright, Xiaochen, how will you fight back?" Yang Chen knew that Xiaochen would definitely not take this lying down and would definitely retaliate. Regarding this, Yang Chen had already prepared for it. He had already made preparations for all the major cities in Tianzhou, as well as the various subordinate forces of the Hetian sect. After all, Yang Chen had ordered the experts of the Hetian sect to launch a sneak attack on 5 cities in the Sword Province and wipe out the affiliated forces of the 6 major sword sections. The most likely way for Xiaochen to retaliate was to give Yang Chen a taste of his own medicine by attacking the affiliated forces of the Hetian sect. Therefore, Yang Chen had been prepared for this. The letter of challenge had already been issued. Now, all that was left was to wait for Xiaochen's response. This was also the first time Yang Chen and Xiaochen had fought. Based on the current situation, Yang Chen clearly had the upper hand and even had a slight advantage. This was because as long as Xiaochen dared to give him a taste of his own medicine and attack the subordinate forces of the Hetian sect, Yang Chen was confident that he could make the sword sect suffer a small loss again. Having already prepared for this, Yang Chen's battle intent continued to rise. Yang Chen was waiting for Xiaochen's counterattack. However, 3 days had passed and the sword sect did not make any moves. He had already waited for 3 days, but the sword sect did not make any moves at all. This made Yang Chen very suspicious. Could it be that Xiaochen had endured this? But that was obviously impossible. Yang Chen understood Xiaochen and felt that with Xiaochen's personality, he was not someone who could endure this kind of humiliation. Before he became the sect master of the Hetian sect, Yang Chen had a detailed understanding of Xiaochen. He knew that Xiaochen was not someone who would endure this kind of humiliation. It could even be said that Xiaochen had a vengeful personality. All along, as long as someone provoked Xiaochen in the sword sect, Xiaochen would not remain indifferent. This was the case when the sword sect was still very weak. Now, as the sword sect continued to grow stronger, logically speaking, Xiaochen would not be able to endure this. He had always felt that Xiaochen would definitely make a counterattack. However, until now, Xiaochen had not made any moves and the sword sect had not made any moves. This made Yang Chen somewhat suspicious. Every day, he paid close attention to the sword sect's every move. At the same time, he was also on guard. He was constantly paying attention to the sword sect's people entering Tianzhou. However, 3 days had passed and he had not made any moves. A trace of confusion flashed through Yang Chen's eyes as he sat in the garden. At this moment, Yang Chen was indeed somewhat suspicious of what Xiaochen was trying to do. Even Yang Chen did not believe that Xiaochen would not respond because Xiaochen was not the kind of person who would not retaliate after being hit. However, the most important question right now was how Xiaochen would retaliate. This was the question that Yang Chen was most concerned about. Yang Chen was filled with doubts. However, these doubts did not last long. Very soon, Xiaochen gave him an answer. The next day, which was the 4th day since the Hetian sect had launched a sneak attack on the 5 cities of the Jian province, Xiaochen's counterattack finally came. Yang Chen, who had just finished a night of cultivation, did not even have the time to wash up before an elder of the Hetian sect hurriedly came to find him. The elder did not even have time to reply to Yang Chen before he hurriedly spoke. "Sect master, something bad has happened." Upon hearing the elder's words and seeing how anxious he was, Yang Chen appeared to be much calmer. "What's the hurry? Speak slowly." Hearing Yang Chen's words, the elder took a deep breath and told Yang Chen what had happened last night. The elder said with an ice-cold expression, last night, we headed to the Dan Valley. The people from the Talisman sect and Weapons sect were ambushed by the people from the Sword sect on their way back. The escorts were all killed and the items were all stolen. Also, what else is there? Speak. Yang Chen's expression darkened when he heard the elder's words. Facing Yang Chen's questioning, the elder continued to speak nervously. Also, just a moment ago, the Sword sect announced to the public that anyone who can provide the whereabouts of the Heavenly Sect disciples outside of the Tianzhou region will be rewarded with 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. It's here. Xiao Chen's counterattack is finally here. Hearing this, Yang Chen's eyes flashed with a cold glint. For the past 4 days, Yang Chen had been waiting for Xiao Chen's counterattack. Now, it was finally here. However, Yang Chen did not expect Xiao Chen's target at all. Xiao Chen did not launch a sneak attack on any cities in the Tianzhou region. Instead, he targeted the Heavenly Sect disciples outside of the Tianzhou region. These people were outside of the Tianzhou region and the Heavenly Sect could not fully protect them. Therefore, it was much easier for the Sword sect to kill them. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2132. As one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, the Heavenly Sect had many disciples. Naturally, it was impossible for all of them to stay in the sect. As one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, the Heavenly Sect had many disciples. Naturally, it was impossible for all of them to stay in the sect. Many of the disciples were either out on missions or training. It could be said that the Heavenly Sect's disciples could be found in almost every province in the Great Thousand World. Now that these disciples were out, they had become Xiao Chen's targets. Moreover, the most troublesome thing for Yang Chen was that it was very difficult to protect these disciples. It was impossible to take care of all of them. Moreover, the caravans that the Heavenly Sect had sent to the Dan Valley, the Armament Sect, and the Talisman Sect had also been robbed by the Sword Sect. Although the loss was not too great, it still made Yang Chen furious. Yang Chen's eyes flickered with a cold light as he said coldly, "Xiao Chen, I have underestimated you. However, this is what makes it interesting. If you are too weak, then it will be boring for me to play with you." Xiao Chen's counterattack was out of Yang Chen's expectations. At this time, the only thing Yang Chen could do was to urgently summon the scattered disciples of the Heavenly Sect back. As for how many of them could return safely, it was up to fate. As for using the same method to deal with the Sword Sect, it was impossible now because in these 3 days, Xiao Chen had already summoned all the disciples of the Sword Sect back to the Sword Sect. The reason why Xiao Chen had to wait 3 days before taking action was because he wanted all the disciples of the Sword Sect to return safely. Therefore, it was delayed for 3 days. Unfortunately, Yang Chen did not expect this at all during these 3 days, so he did not make any response. At this time, it was impossible to besiege and kill the disciples of the Sword Sect. As for directly attacking the Sword Sect, Yang Chen did not have such thoughts for the time being because no matter if it was the Sword Sect or the Heavenly Sect, they were not ready to fight again. The conflict this time was entirely because of Yang Chen's demonstration against the Sword Sect. He could only order the disciples of the Heavenly Sect outside to return as soon as possible. After giving the order, Yang Chen looked in the direction of the Sword Province and muttered coldly, "Xiao Chen, let's wait and see." Yang Chen could already guess that the disciples of the Heavenly Sect outside would suffer heavy casualties this time. However, Yang Chen could not stop this because he could not send too many people to protect the disciples outside. Otherwise, the headquarters of the Heavenly Sect would be empty. At that time, it would give Xiao Chen an opportunity to attack headquarters. Empty headquarters would give Xiao Chen an opportunity. He made a decision immediately. He would rather give up on the disciples who were training or doing missions outside to ensure the safety of the Heavenly Sect headquarters. The news had already been sent out by the Sword Sect, and soon, news about the disciples of the Heavenly Sect was also sent back to the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect did not go back on their word to the people or forces who provided the information. Once the information was verified to be accurate, they would pay 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. One after another, the whereabouts of the Kadian sect disciples were exposed to the eyes of the Sword's Gate. At the same time, the many experts of the Sword's Gate, who had long been prepared, moved out one after another, and began to ambush the Kadian sect disciples who were out to fight. Normally, no one would dare to provoke the disciples of the heavenly sect when they were outside alone or in groups of 3 to 5. However, they were powerless against the attacks of the Sword Sect. Without the protection of the sect, the disciples of the heavenly sect were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered in the face of the experts of the Sword Sect. In just one day, more than 100 disciples of the heavenly sect were killed. The news was sent back to the heavenly sect. In the cave, Xiaochen, Zhangxing, and the others were sitting together and drinking wine. Li Ke said with a smile. "Awesome. Let's see what the new sect leader of the heavenly sect will do. Now that we have the whereabouts of thousands of disciples of the heavenly sect, if he doesn't send reinforcements, none of them will be able to escape." Previously, when the heavenly sect launched a sneak attack on 5 cities, Li Ke and the others were all furious. Now, it was finally time for the Sword Sect to counterattack. To be honest, when Xiaochen first announced this plan, even Zhangxing and the others did not expect it at all. This was because Xiaochen did not set the target within Tianzhou, but outside of Tianzhou. However, judging from the current situation, Xiaochen's plan was obviously successful. Yang Chen was not prepared at all. Now, it was up to Yang Chen to make his own choice. This was only the first step of Xiaochen's plan. The second step would depend on how Yang Chen dealt with it. If Yang Chen sent too many experts to protect the disciples outside, then Xiaochen would lead the experts of the Sword Sect and directly attack the headquarters of the Heavenly Sect. He did not want to destroy the Heavenly Sect in one fell swoop, but at least he wanted to make the Heavenly Sect lose face. After all, his own headquarters had been attacked by others. This was obviously not a glorious thing. Moreover, the losses would definitely not be small. They were waiting for Yang Chen's decision. Unfortunately, Yang Chen did not take the bait. Just as Xiaochen and the others gathered together and waited for the heavenly sect's response, a sword head hurriedly walked in and bowed respectfully to Xiaochen. "Sect leader, the heavenly sect has not made any moves for the time being. They have not sent anyone to receive the disciples. An entire day had passed since the Sword Sect took action, but there was still no response from the heavenly sect. Yang Chen also did not send any experts to receive the disciples." Hearing the sword head's report, Zhangxing and the others could not help but feel a little disappointed. Because of this, Xiaochen's plan to attack the heavenly sect's headquarters would be completely ruined. However, Xiaochen smiled at this time. He was not discouraged at all. Instead, he said indifferently, "It's reasonable. If Yang Chen can't even see through this, then there's no point." Xiaochen seemed to have known that Yang Chen would see through his plan. Therefore, when the second step of the plan failed, Xiaochen did not take it to heart. After saying this, Xiaochen looked at the sword head and said, "Pass down the order. Kill all the heavenly sect disciples on the list. Don't let any of them return to Tianzhou." Since Yang Chen did not take the bait, they could only stop while they were ahead. Killing some of his disciples was not a loss. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the sword head respectfully nodded and left the courtyard. Not long after this sword head left, another sword head hurriedly ran in. His face had a hint of excitement, and he even forgot to salute Xiaochen as he hurriedly said, "Sect leader, we caught a big fish." The leader of the swordsmen had indeed been a little rude, but Xiaochen didn't care too much about it. On the contrary, he was more curious about the big fish that the leader of the swordsmen had mentioned. With a smile on his face, Xiaochen asked, "Why are you so excited?" "Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2133. Yang Chen didn't fall for Xiaochen's counterattack. With that, the second step of Xiaochen's plan to sneak attack the heavenly sect naturally fell through. Yang Chen obviously thought about this point, which was why he didn't send out the experts of the heavenly sect. It was to prevent Xiaochen from sneak attacking. Without the opportunity to launch a sneak attack on the Kadian sect, Xiaochen could only target the disciples of the Kadian sect who were currently outside. Although this would not affect the Kadian sect too much, it was still better than nothing. They had already given up on the second step of the plan, but who would have thought that the sword head would actually give Xiaochen such a surprise? Facing Xiaochen's question, the sword head still couldn't hide his excitement as he said, "Sect leader, there is reliable news that the heavenly sect has an End Realm elder who is in Dao province." Dao province, which was where Tai Ching Temple was. When they heard this, Xiaochen, Tsang Xing, Lin Qing, Li Ku, and the others were all stunned. Then, they all laughed out loud. He originally thought that there would only be some small fish and shrimps in the net this time, but who would have thought that there would actually be a big fish? Forcefully suppressing the excitement in his heart, Xiaochen looked at the sword head and asked, "Is the news reliable?" "It has been confirmed, it is definitely reliable." Hearing this, the sword head nodded his head. The news had already been confirmed, and according to the sword head, it was a coincidence that the elder from the heavenly sect was in the Dao province. Moreover, he was alone at the moment, and there were no other experts from the heavenly sect around him. A lone End Realm expert. With that, it would be easy for the sword sect to surround and kill him. After all, although an End Realm expert was strong, if he faced 3 deputy sect leaders of the sword sect, the outcome was obvious. Killing an End Realm elder was a huge blow to Heaven Joining sect. After all, even Heaven Joining sect didn't have many End Realm experts. Killing one meant that they had one less. Excited, Xiaochen quickly made arrangements. He immediately said to Wu Huan, Zhou Song, and Lin Qing, "The 3 of you will go to the Dao province." At the same time, they sent out 3 deputy sect elders to not give this Hetian sect elder any chance. With 3 End Realm experts attacking one person, it was pretty much impossible for them to fail. Unless that Hetian sect elder had some precious life-saving treasure. However, the chances of that weren't high. When they heard Xiaochen's words, Wu Huan, Zhou Song, and Lin Qing all nodded in agreement. Then, the 3 of them immediately set off towards the Dao province. On the side of the sword sect, they received this unexpected surprise and found out where this Hetian sect elder was. On the other side, within the Hetian sect, Yang Chen also found out about this news. At this moment, within the main hall of the Hetian sect, Yang Chen sat on the main seat. His face was dark and sunken as he looked at an old man below. Why is Qian Feng in the Dao province? When did he leave the sect? Why didn't I know? Yang Chen didn't know that Qian Feng was in the Dao prefecture. Only now did he know that Qian Feng wasn't in the Heavenly Gate, but in the Dao prefecture, all by himself, because of the counterattack of the Sword Gate. When he heard Yang Chen's words and looked at the sunken Yang Chen, the old man said with an ugly expression, "Sect leader, please calm down. Qian Feng went to the Dao province because of his concubine's father's birthday. Qian Feng was an elder of the Hetian sect and an End Realm expert. There was no need to talk about his status. Moreover, because Qian Feng was lustful, he had many women around him. Including all his wives and concubines, there were at least 10 of them. When he heard that Qian Feng went to the Dao province to celebrate his concubine's father's birthday, the rage in Yang Chen's eyes burned brighter and brighter. In front of the old man, Yang Chen couldn't help but scold him. This idiot. What time is it now? He actually went to the Dao province alone for a woman. He is simply asking for death. In Yang Chen's eyes, Qian Feng was just an idiot. Moreover, he was extremely stupid to go to the Dao province alone. Yang Chen didn't even need to think to know how dangerous Qian Feng's current situation was. Knowing that Yang Chen was in a rage, the old man tried to calm him down. "Sect leader, please calm down. I have already sent a message to Qian Feng. I believe that he will immediately leave the Dao province and return to the sect." Both Yang Chen and the old man knew that the sword sect was trying to kill the Hetian sect disciples outside. However, Yang Chen snorted coldly after hearing the old man's words. Do you really think that Qian Feng can return? Yang Chen didn't think that Qian Feng could return because as long as Xiao Chen knew about this, there was no need to say what would happen to Qian Feng. Xiao Chen definitely wouldn't let go of such a heaven-sent opportunity. He didn't think that the chances of Qian Feng coming back alive were high. Unless Xiao Chen still didn't know about Qian Feng's situation. If that was the case, Qian Feng still had a chance to escape. However, this chance was too slim. The sword sect definitely knew about Qian Feng's situation. Moreover, the Dao province was far away from Tianzhou. Even if Yang Chen sent people over to help, they wouldn't be able to make it in time. Therefore, Yang Chen couldn't help Qian Feng. The rage in his eyes slowly faded. Since things had reached such a stage, there was no point in getting angry. Yang Chen could only curse in his heart, "Idiot, you are asking for death." While cursing in his heart, Yang Chen said, "Inform Qian Feng to leave the Dao province and head to the Min province. When the time comes, you will go receive him." The Min province was in the middle of the Dao province in Tianzhou. As long as Qian Feng could reach there, Yang Chen would be able to send people to save him. Facing an End Realm Elder, Yang Chen couldn't just watch him die. However, he was in the Dao province and couldn't do anything. Everything depended on whether or not Qian Feng could reach the Min province safely. Hearing Yang Chen's words, the old man respectfully nodded his head. Yang Chen placed all his hopes on whether or not Xiao Chen's reaction would be slower and give Qian Feng time to leave the Dao province and rush to the Min province. Only then could Yang Chen save Qian Feng. Unfortunately, Yang Chen's hopes were destined to be destroyed. Just as he was thinking about how to save Qian Feng, Wu Wan, Zhou Song, and Lin Qing were rushing towards the Dao province. With the sword sect's movement speed, before Qian Feng left the Dao province, Zhou Song and the other two would probably kill him. It would be really difficult to leave the Dao province and head to the Min province. He didn't know that the sword sect would move so quickly, but Yang Chen had no choice. He could only choose to do this. Apart from that, there was no other way. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 2134. Yang Chen told Qian Feng to rush to Min province as soon as possible, but unfortunately, he was still one step behind. Dao province, Baiqing City. Qian Feng was currently in the Lin family in Baiqing City. Originally, because of Qian Feng's arrival, the Lin family was in full swing. Everyone wanted to establish a relationship with Qian Feng. However, at this moment, the Lin family's main hall was no longer as lively as it was a few days ago. Only Qian Feng and a few members of the Lin family were sitting together, and everyone had a gloomy expression on their faces. Just now, Qian Feng received a message from the Kadian sect, telling him to rush to Min province immediately or his life would be in danger. After hearing the message from the sect, Qian Feng, who had been talking cheerfully a moment ago, naturally knew what had happened. Qian Feng also knew that the sword gate had besieged and killed the heavenly sect disciples outside. However, what Qian Feng didn't expect, or rather, what caught him off guard was that the sword sect actually targeted him. Usually, Qian Feng relied on his status as an elder of the Kadian sect and his cultivation base to rarely put anyone in his eyes. However, facing the threat from the sword sect, Qian Feng didn't dare to be careless at all. This was because the sword sect didn't care about his status as an elder of the Kadian sect at all. It could even be said that because Qian Feng was an elder of the Kadian sect, the sword sect wanted to kill him. With the tense relationship between the sword sect and the Kadian sect, Qian Feng knew very well that Xiao Chen would definitely not let go of such an opportunity. As long as Xiao Chen knew his whereabouts, Xiao Chen would definitely send people to kill him. Therefore, after receiving the message from the sect, Qian Feng immediately made preparations to evacuate. Sitting on the main seat, Qian Feng glanced at the members of the Lin family and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, this old man will leave immediately." At this moment of life and death, Qian Feng couldn't care about his concubine. Naturally, he couldn't take her with him. He could only leave her in the Lin family and rush to Min province alone. This would be faster. Hearing Qian Feng's words, the members of the Lin family looked at each other. Then, the ancestor of the Lin family said, "Elder, you don't have to worry about us. Just leave as soon as possible." Everyone in the Lin family knew why Qian Feng was in such a hurry to leave. It was because the threat of the sword sect was right in front of them. No one knew when the sword sect would appear. If Qian Feng was blocked by the sword sect, then he would be in danger. After a few simple words of farewell, Qian Feng prepared to leave. But at this time, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing's figures tore through the void and slowly appeared above Baiqing City. The three of them didn't hide their whereabouts and sped all the way from the sword sect. According to the intelligence, Qian Feng was now in the Lin family of Evergreen City. When the three of them appeared, a terrifying aura instantly descended from the sky. When Qian Feng, who was in the Lin family's courtyard and was about to leave, felt this aura, his expression immediately changed. Three end-realm powerhouses, and these three people were definitely not from the Kadian sect. When Qian Feng felt the aura of Zhou Song and the other two, his expression was extremely ugly. He didn't expect the people from the sword sect to come so quickly and arrive so quickly. Not only did Qian Feng's face turn pale, but the other members of the Lin clan were also terrified. In the eyes of the Lin clan, the Sword's Gate was a colossal existence. They could easily crush the entire Lin clan with a flick of their fingers. They had never thought of fighting with the sword sect because it was simply unrealistic. They wanted to run, but now they couldn't. Just as Qian Feng noticed the appearance of Zhou Song and the other two, the city lord of Baiqing City also flew up from the city lord manor. He came in front of Zhou Song and the other two and bowed respectfully. "Three seniors, I'm the city lord of Baiqing City. May I ask why seniors have come to Baiqing City?" The city lord of Baiqing City was also from the Taiqing Temple, but at this moment, in front of Zhou Song and the other two, he didn't dare to be disrespectful. At the same time, he didn't dare to have the slightest complaint about Zhou Song and the other two publicly breaking the rules of Baiqing City. Hearing the words of the city lord of Baiqing City, Wu Huan said lightly, "The matters of the sword sect have nothing to do with you, Baiqing City." He took the initiative to reveal his identity. Hearing this, the city lord of Baiqing City swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He stood obediently beside Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing. The city lord of Baiqing City didn't dare to take another look. At this moment, Zhou Song also sensed Qian Feng's aura. He looked directly in the direction of the Lin family, and the corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. Found him. In the entire Baiqing City, there was only one end-realm expert, Qian Feng. It wasn't difficult to find him. As his voice fell, Zhou Song took a step forward and appeared in the sky above the Lin family. At the same time, Wu Huan and Lin Qing followed closely behind. The three of them quickly appeared in front of Qian Feng and the Lin family. Seeing Zhou Song and the other two appear, although Qian Feng's face was gloomy to the extreme, he still pretended to be calm and said, "Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Lin Qing, what is the meaning of your sword sect?" In the end, they were still a step too late. Before they could escape, they were blocked by Zhou Song and the other two. Hearing Qian Feng's words, Zhou Song smiled and said, "Don't you know what we're here for?" With the relationship between the sword sect and the heavenly gate, Zhou Song naturally didn't need to hide the killing intent in his heart. As soon as he said this, the Lin family members were so scared that their faces turned pale. Qian Feng also said angrily in his heart, "You, Zhou Song, if you kill me, you should know the consequences. The sect master won't let the sword sect off. You say it as if letting you go will allow the sword sect and the heavenly gate to coexist peacefully." Hearing Qian Feng's words, Wu Huan sneered and said, "The relationship between the sword sect and the heavenly gate was already like fire and water. Therefore, if Qian Feng wanted to use the heavenly gate to threaten Zhou Song and the other two, it was simply a fool's dream." As Wu Huan's voice fell, Lin Qing had already taken out his longsword. dense sword energy surrounded his body as he looked coldly at Qian Feng and said coldly, "Qian Feng, cut the crap. Today, you will definitely die." As he said this, Lin Qing took a step forward and directly attacked Qian Feng. Xiaochen sent the three of them to kill Qian Feng. Lin Qing was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. Moreover, to prevent any more trouble, he had to kill Qian Feng first. Facing Lin Qing's attack, Qian Feng naturally couldn't do nothing. He immediately chose to fight back. As the two of them fought, the surrounding space was directly locked down by the two of them. At the same time, Zhou Song and Wu Huan didn't stay idle and immediately surrounded Qian Feng. The three End Realm experts fought fiercely together. Facing this scene, the Lin family members were completely stunned. No one dared to step forward. A battle of this level was not something a small family like the Lin family could interfere in. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 2135. No one from the Lin family dared to move, let alone intervene. Following the battle between Qian Feng, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing, the city lord of Baiqing City, who was not far away, was also watching all of this nervously. In fact, when he knew the identities of Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing, the city lord of Baiqing City already knew the purpose of their visit. This was because the city lord of Baiqing City knew that Qian Feng was in the Lin family. Moreover, when Qian Feng arrived, the city lord of Baiqing City personally welcomed and paid a visit to the Lin family in Qian Feng. Therefore, as the deputy sect master of the sword sect, the city lord of Baiqing City naturally knew the purpose of Zhou Song and the other two's visit. Looking at Qian Feng, who was besieged by Zhou Song and the other two, the city lord of Baiqing City was filled with emotions. When Qian Feng first came to Baiqing City, it was so glorious, but now, he was almost in a life-threatening situation. The city lord of Baiqing City naturally didn't dare to interfere with the matters of the sword sect and the heavenly sect. Therefore, just now, he had already informed the Tai Ching Temple of the matter through the voice transmission talisman to see how the higher-ups of the Tai Ching Temple were going to deal with it. Before receiving orders from the higher-ups, the city lord of Baiqing City obviously wouldn't casually make a move. The battle was very intense. Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing all wanted to kill Qian Feng as soon as possible and not give him any chance to escape. Therefore, the three of them used killing moves as soon as they attacked, making it difficult for Qian Feng to deal with from the beginning. It was also because Qian Feng had an End Realm cultivation that his life aura was extremely strong. It was indeed difficult to kill him in a short period of time. Otherwise, he would have been killed by Zhou Song and the other two. But looking at the current situation, if no one helped, Qian Feng would definitely die if this continued. This was because Zhou Song and the other two wouldn't give Qian Feng any chance to escape. Without a way to escape, one could imagine Qian Feng's fate. No matter how strong your life force was, you would die sooner or later when fighting 1 against 3. All the warriors in Baiqing City were paying attention to the battle between the four, and the city lord of Baiqing City soon received a reply from the Tai Ching Temple. The content of the letter was very simple, and the meaning was also very clear, which was to not help either side. Such a reply was actually reasonable, and city lord Baiqing Cheng was not surprised. After all, whether it was the sword sect or the heavenly sect, the Great Pure One Temple could not afford to offend them. Although Tai Ching Temple was a top power, compared to Sword Sect and Heaven Joining Sect, Tai Ching Temple was still too weak. Be it End Realm, Dao Realm experts or top combat strength, Tai Ching Temple was no match for Sword Sect and Heaven Joining Sect. So, Tai Ching Temple's best choice was to not help either side and not offend either side. After receiving the order from the higher-ups of the Great Purity Temple, the city lord of Baiqing Cheng also completely dispelled his intention to make a move. He directly chose to wait and see. As time passed, the injuries on Qian Feng's body became more and more serious. Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and Lin Qing also successfully grasped this opportunity. Their attacks became more and more violent, wanting to kill Qian Feng in one fell swoop. It had been many years since he felt the threat of death. At this moment, he was once again shrouded by the thick aura of death. Qian Feng was shocked and even a little afraid. He tried his best to block the attacks of Zhou Song and the other two, but after fighting for so long, Qian Feng also felt more and more strained. It was very difficult for him to continue. It could be said that this was his final struggle, but Qian Feng still didn't give up. Zhou Song, let me go. I agree to join the Sword Sect. No matter what, I am an End Realm expert. If I join the Sword Sect, it will definitely be of help to the Sword Sect. In the face of death, Qian Feng actually chose to betray them. He was willing to leave the Heavenly Sect and join the Sword Sect in exchange for a chance to live. Hearing Qian Feng's words, many people in Baiqingcheng revealed a look of disdain. Betraying the sect was definitely something that everyone looked down on. After all, the sect had nurtured you, but you chose to betray the sect at the moment of life and death. Such a person was a coward in the eyes of others. Many people despised Qian Feng in their hearts. When Zhou Song heard Qian Feng's words, the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile as he said, "I'm sorry, the order we received was to kill you. Furthermore, our sword sect doesn't need someone like you." Xiao Chen's order was to kill Qian Feng, so Zhou Song didn't hesitate to reject Qian Feng's suggestion. As his voice fell, Zhou Song punched out. Facing Zhou Song's attack, Qian Feng's expression was extremely ugly, but he still chose to resist. The two fists collided fiercely. Qian Feng used all his strength and finally succeeded in blocking Zhou Song's attack. However, at this moment, Wu Huan, who was at the side, directly slapped out with his palm. Qian Feng, who was colliding with Zhou Song, obviously had no way to deal with Wu Huan's palm. It was a direct hit, and Qian Feng's whole body was directly blasted away. He spat out a large mouthful of blood, and his injuries worsened. Being hit by Wu Huan's attack directly made Qian Feng's injuries worse. However, all of this wasn't over yet. Just as Qian Feng was seriously injured, Lin Qing was already prepared to give Qian Feng a fatal blow. The long sword in his hand bloomed with rich flame spiritual power, and the raging flames wrapped around the long sword. Lin Qing stabbed out with his sword and shouted coldly, "Scarlet Annihilation." The flames were like a giant dragon. As the long sword stabbed out, it instantly swallowed Qian Feng's body. The raging flames seemed to burn the sky, and Qian Feng's body was in such flames. Everyone knew that Qian Feng was probably finished. As time passed, about 100 breaths later, the flames slowly dissipated, and Lin Qing and Qian Feng's figures appeared in front of everyone once again. At this moment, Qian Feng's chest had been pierced by Lin Qing's sword. The rich flame spiritual power also burned Qian Feng's whole body black. Lin Qing's fatal blow still took Qian Feng's life in the end. An End Realm super expert was directly killed in front of the many cultivators of Baiqing City just like that. The fall of an End Realm expert was extremely rare. After all, looking at the entire Great Thousand World, End Realm experts were old ancestor-level figures who could establish their own sections. Without sovereigns, there really weren't many people who could kill them. Everyone was shocked, but the people who found it the most difficult to accept the scene in front of them were naturally the people of the Lin family. Looking at Qian Feng, whose chest had been pierced by Lin Qing's sword, the people of the Lin family were completely stunned. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. They didn't dare to believe that the Hetian sect elder Qian Feng, who was so glorious just a second ago, actually died in front of their eyes just like that. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2136. To put it bluntly, the Lin family of Baiqing City used to be an inconspicuous small family in Baiqing City. The reason why the Lin family could develop so smoothly over the years was entirely because of Qian Feng. Because Qian Feng had taken a fancy to a young lady of the Lin family and was quite fond of her, the Lin family was able to take advantage of Qian Feng's power and rise. It could be said that Qian Feng was the backer of the Lin family, but now, this big backer had collapsed. For a moment, everyone in the Lin family didn't know how to express their feelings at this time. Previously, because of Qian Feng's existence, the Lin family naturally offended a lot of people in Baiqing City. However, because of Qian Feng's deterrence, no one dared to do anything to the Lin family. But now, without Qian Feng, it wasn't difficult to guess what would happen to the big families that had been offended by the Lin family. Everyone in the Lin family felt a chill in their hearts, but Zhou Song and the others didn't care about this. After Lin Qing killed Qian Feng, Zhou Song and the other two took Qian Feng's body and directly disappeared into the sky without paying attention to anyone. Zhou Song and the other two had no interest in the Lin family at all. Although the Lin family had a good relationship with Qian Feng, so what? With the Lin family's strength, they didn't pose any threat to the Sword Sect at all. Moreover, even if the Sword Sect didn't make a move, the Lin family would probably soon decline. After Zhou Song and the other two left, the city lord of Baiqing City finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't notice that his back was already drenched in sweat. After exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, the city lord of Baiqing City glanced at the Lin family members who were still in a daze with some pity. Then, he left without saying a word and disappeared. The fall of the Lin family was already destined. After Zhou Song and the other two left, as well as the city lord of Baiqing City, the Lin family's ancestor came back to his senses after a long time. He, who was already not young, now looked even older. Looking around at the Lin family members who were a little dazed, the Lin family's ancestor said in a hoarse voice, "Let's disperse and get ready to withdraw from Baiqing City." The Lin family's ancestor was very clear that the only way out for the Lin family, which had lost Qian Feng's protection, was to take the initiative to withdraw and hand over everything that they had previously occupied unconditionally. In this way, they might still be able to save the lives of the Lin family members. However, the other members of the Lin family didn't think so, especially the young people. When they heard that the ancestor was going to withdraw from Baiqing City, someone immediately said, "Ancestor, if we withdraw from Baiqing City, what about the family's business?" Lin family's family's ancestor, the ancestor's ancestor of the Lin family. Facing the situation of being surrounded by wolves, the ancestor of the Lin family was very clear that if he wanted to live, he could only throw away the meat in his hands. Otherwise, he would only end up in destruction. The rise and fall of the Lin family did not matter to the Great Thousand World at all, and not many people paid attention to it. This was because the Lin family was too weak, and its rise and fall could not even cause a small ripple in the Great Thousand World. At this time, the major forces were still paying attention to the battle between the Sword Gate and the Heavenly Gate. In other words, it was the first battle between the new sect master of the Heavenly Sect, Yang Chen, and the sect master of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chen. After a short day, all the major sects in the Great Wide World knew that Qian Feng had been killed. In the Saber Sect, Dao Ju, who had become the new sect master of the Saber Sect, was sitting in the garden and drinking wine out of boredom. A deputy sect master of the Saber Sect was reporting to him about the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Sect. Hearing that Elder Qian Feng of the Heavenly Gate had been killed, Dao Ju revealed a faint smile and said, "Qian Feng was courting death. However, in this way, Yang Chen has suffered a small loss this time. I reckon he's feeling depressed right now." That should be the case. After all, the death of an End Realm expert is something that even the Heavenly Sect can't do nothing about. Hearing this, the deputy sect leader smiled and replied. The fall of an End Realm expert was something the Heavenly Gate couldn't ignore. As he said this, a mysterious smile appeared on Dao Ju's face. Now that the major sects are basically controlled by the younger generation, don't you think we should organize a gathering to prove the arrival of a new era? Organizing a gathering of an unprecedented scale was something that Dao Ju had been thinking about for the past few days. It was simply too boring. With Dao Ju's personality, he was indeed annoyed by all the big and small matters in the Saber Sect. Hearing Dao Ju's words, the deputy sect master of the Saber Sect did not object. After all, Dao Ju was now the sect master. No one in the Saber Sect could object to anything that he wanted to do. No one could object to him. After he said that, Dao Ju paused for a moment and decided, yes, we should organize a gathering of an unprecedented scale to let the world know that a new era has arrived. Dao Ju decided to hold a gathering to tell the world that a new era had arrived. Dao Ju was extremely excited because of his idea. On the other side, Yang Chen, who was in the heavenly sect, was in an extremely bad mood. He already knew that Qian Feng had been killed. However, a day had passed, and the anger in his heart showed no signs of dissipating. This was because Qian Feng's death meant that the first clash between Yang Chen and Xiao Chen had ended in his defeat. Moreover, Yang Chen had been the one who had started the fight. In the end, he had been defeated by Xiao Chen, causing him to suffer a small loss. Damn it, you idiot. You're just a stupid pig. Sitting alone in the garden, Yang Chen's face was gloomy as he cursed furiously in his heart. Yang Chen didn't feel any pity for Qian Feng's death, nor did he feel any grief. Because in Yang Chen's opinion, Qian Feng deserved to die. What really made Yang Chen furious was that Qian Feng's death had caused him and the entire heavenly sect to lose face. This was what made Yang Chen furious. After cursing furiously for a while, Yang Chen took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed his anger. He looked at the old man beside him and said, "Stop all actions against the sword sect." Yang Chen took the initiative to stop because there was no point in continuing. Unless Yang Chen wanted to start an all-out war with the sword sect, but now was clearly not the time. Thus, Yang Chen could only swallow the bitter fruit and choose to stop. Hearing Yang Chen's words, the old man respectfully nodded. He then looked in the direction of the sword sect and said with a cold glint in his eyes, "Xiao Chen, this is only the beginning. We still don't know who will win in the end. Don't be happy too early. Please add, please vote, please recommend." You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.